I've scoured the country up and down and left and right, and looking at the place where I want to be as we go over this event called peak oil, or the peak of global oil production, and where I would like to be afterwards, and this is where I want to be. There's no question about it. There's wonderful people here, there's technology here, there's thinkers here, there's free spirits here, and there's a few crazy people here, so I should be pretty comfortable. For those of you who don't know who I am, yes, I was an LAPD narcotics investigator. I came from a CIA family. My mother, and had been even before the CIA, she was the senior cryptanalyst for our Secretary of State Cordell Hull during the Second World War. My father left the Air Force, went to work for Martin Marietta, and he worked on the Titan 3C, which put up all the CIA's keyhole spy satellites. Dad's relatives were all CIA. I'm an only child, fourth generation, born in Washington, D.C. Everybody in the family had a clearance, and I used to come home from school and say, "Mom, what's for dinner?" And she'd say, "I can't tell you." I'm a graduate in political science and honors grad 1973 from UCLA. And the CIA tried to recruit me twice, and the first time was while I was still in college. I had interned for LAPD. They ran a background check, and by that time I had a clearance just because I lived in the same house with my family. And that's true. Dad might have left his briefcase open, so I had a Q clearance, which is above, that was cleared to handle atomic secrets. I didn't even know it, but LAPD ran my background. Dad was a conservative Republican. I wound up interning for the chief of police. I had all the right pedigrees and all that stuff, and they tried to recruit me as a senior at UCLA. I turned them down. I became a policeman in South Central Los Angeles, specialized in narcotics, and then they tried to recruit me again using a very beautiful career contract agent. That recruitment pitch was a little bit different from the one I had in the executive office building outside the White House, the first one, but it was through her that I discovered that the CIA, I will name the agency, I don't shrink from naming nobody, was smuggling massive quantities of heroin into the country, not only Los Angeles, but New Orleans in particular. I wasn't relieved of duty. What had happened was, after I tried to report what I had seen in New Orleans, I refused to get involved, and I tried to report to the guys in intelligence at LAPD, "Look, these CIA guys are dealing drugs, somebody needs to stop that." And people started shooting at me. And I started getting death threats, and I tape recorded a death threat and ultimately asked the chief of police for help, and the message I got back was, "The chief is busy, he can give you 5 or 10 minutes in a week to 10 days. If you're still alive, would you like to make an appointment?" And that's when I resigned from LAPD. And I've been pretty much on the record ever since. And studying that has led me to study a multitude of things, which has led me to the peak oil subject. But in between, there was this little small event called September 11th. And there is a direct connection between September 11th and peak oil, which I will talk about pretty much at the end of the presentation. For those of you who haven't read or seen Crossing the Rubicon, it's been as high as 33 on the Amazon bestseller list in spite of, thank you. In spite of some serious efforts to encourage the publisher not to do the right things to promote the book and those kind of things that can happen. We're doing pretty well with the book still. We've sold about 85,000 copies, and we're in some talks for foreign reprints. And the book is having a second life because the book is equally about this thing called peak oil, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. There's another picture of the book here. We have the books available back there on the table. Mark in the back, wave your hands. We also have From the Wilderness t-shirts, and we have DVDs and of my Truth and Lies video, which I recorded this at Portland State University on November 28, 2001. And I told then, this is what, 3 years ago, or 4 years ago almost, and this video, that old, has held up remarkably with this book that came out last September. In other words, history has vindicated everything I've said, and the two go very well together. I also publish a newsletter called From the Wilderness, which I started in 1998 and mailed out 68 copies to friends, and I said, if you like what I wrote in these 8 pages, send me $25, I'll do it again next month. As of last month, we are now at 24,000 subscribers in 40 countries, including 50 universities around the world and 45 members of the U.S. Congress, both houses. So we have had some progress. We also have the subscription forms back there, both online subscriptions and hard copy, if you want either one. So that's the end of the commercial part of this, but I just wanted to give you that right up front in case I hook you with something we're going to talk about. And basically, I am known as Mr. Cheery. Because when I'm through talking, people, what was the line Gino said? Gino said, there's one guy who, when somebody lectures, he makes everybody want to go out and shoot somebody else, and when I lecture, everybody wants to go home and shoot themselves. Yeah, well. The good news is there is hope, but we are facing right now with this thing called peak oil. By the way, that's 9/11. This elephant just ran over us, September 11th. In this book, I make a clear-cut case, as I would a homicide detective taking the case to a district attorney or an attorney taking it to a grand jury, that the events of September 11th were orchestrated and perpetrated by the United States government using members of Al-Qaeda who had been totally unwittingly co-opted, and others, five of the hijackers, the so-called hijackers, we know had received training at U.S. military installations, and we owe that bit of juicy information to Newsweek, who promptly forgot that they'd ever published it. I talk about that in the book, and we'll talk about that at the end. But 9/11 is gone. It's over. I am a pragmatist of the nth degree. In other words, I don't do anything to feel good. I don't do anything to feel better. I am not some guy who says, well, I've had a demonstration, I've waved a flag, I've said the war is bad, I've said the coming draft is no good, I've said I don't like the neocons, I'm neither Democrat nor Republican. I only measure my success by change in the political environment. If there is no change in the political environment, I have failed. We are now 40, how many years? 1963, 42 years since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and people are still arguing about acoustic evidence from Dealey Plaza. I don't belong to that camp. We don't have that kind of time to deal with that camp because people are dying now, not just Americans, but people all over the world, and a lot more are going to die. And the question is now how we approach a changing world paradigm. And as I said before, this is the single most important event coming upon us now in human history, period, peak oil. So I choose not to talk about the elephant that ran over us. I'm talking about now the herd of angry elephants that are charging right at us, who are getting ready to trample us. To me, that's much more important to talk about than crimes we don't stand a chance of solving. And the reason I say that is because, in case you didn't know, the 2000 presidential election was stolen. The 2004 presidential election was stolen. Yeah. Computer software now controls all the voting, and it's proprietary software in national elections, so that the American people have no right or ability to check vote tallies. And of course, we've seriously and severely documented all over the country voter fraud. Many of these companies are owned by Republican allies of the Bushes. But I think in the next presidential election, we will see Hillary Clinton offered to us. And I would go back to an old song from The Who where it winds up with a line that says, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, just wearing a dress. There is no difference between Democrats and Republicans. My whole thesis, see, that's why I want to move here. I mean, somehow I'm having the feeling that you guys are going to get a lot of this real fast, and I love that. My whole thesis is that until you change the way money works, you change nothing. Period. So, in order to establish some credibility with you, my newsletter has now been in publication for a little over 7 years. We have broken a great many stories. I have a batting average on predicting events and calling stories before they happen of about 840. Ted Williams only had to bat 400. And so what you're looking at behind me on the screen there, off to my left shoulder, is a story I wrote 5 years ago about a former high-level CIA operative named Edwin Wilson. How many people have ever heard of Edwin Wilson? 1, 2, not many, not 3. Do you remember back in about 1976, I think it was, 77, there was a former CIA guy who was charged with selling about 100,000 pounds of C4 plastic explosives to Muammar Gaddafi. Ed Wilson and Frank Turple, 2 CIA guys. Well, Turple disappeared. I believe he's dead. Ed Wilson was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 5 years ago, after having obtained the court records and including affidavits. Wilson's conviction was based upon an affidavit submitted by the executive director of the Central Intelligence Agency that said he had stopped working for the CIA many years before he sold the explosives to Gaddafi, and that he had no connection with CIA. And I knew that that was not true. The court records proved it. 5 years ago, I wrote a story saying that Ed Wilson would one day walk out of prison a free man. And I actually obtained CIA memoranda that had been submitted in thousands of pages of court records that showed that the CIA actually knew it was a perjured memorandum when they signed it. And so did the people prosecuting the case. It's a major scandal involving some of the highest levels of the US court system, by the way, which is also thoroughly corrupt, in case you didn't know. Well, this was a 5-year-old story, and look at this story from April 28th of this year. The most dangerous man in America, conviction of former CIA agent overturned on false affidavit. That was 5 years ahead of his release. That's just one of the many stories. I'll show you a couple more real quick. Right before September 11th, I was working on the largest investigative series I had ever done. How many people have heard of the insurance company AIG? It is the single largest insurance company in the world with a market capitalization. How many, if I say market cap, how many people know what a market cap of a company is? Very important term. Let's say that this lady right down here in the blue, what's your name, dear? Kitsiana. Kitsiana? Yes. Let's say you own a company that has 1 million shares of stock, and your stock is selling for $10 a share. The market cap of your company is $10 million. All you do is multiply the share price times the number of shares. AIG has a market cap somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 billion. Huge company. They also launder drug money, a lot of other things. Right before 9/11, I was working on this series. How many people would know the name Carlos Lehder, L-E-H-D-E-R, if I mentioned that? Okay. Carlos Lehder, along with Pablo Escobar and one other gentleman, was the co-founder of the Medellin cartel, the cocaine cartel of the 1980s. Later was supposed to be in prison. He's actually been released by the US government. And I found out that his wife was working for AIG in San Francisco. The wife of the co-founder of the Medellin cartel is working for AIG in San Francisco. Okay, thank you. Of course, yes, and a lot of you are going, what? Okay, of course. Because what I found that the CIA has to do, one of their primary functions, $600 billion a year in drug money is generated in the illegal drug trade. For decades, and I have lectured at many universities, I've just been asked to lecture at Cornell, and I'm very pleased about that. I've been and this is from the staff, the faculty, that's the word. I don't have any faculties, but the faculty asked me to go. $600 billion a year in drug money is laundered, and one of the CIA's main jobs is to make sure that that $600 billion a year is laundered through Wall Street, because it's cheap capital. Any of you who have ever borrowed money for anything know that the amount of interest you pay determines what your monthly payments are. And whether you're doing a leveraged buyout or buying a car, cheap capital is the answer in capitalism. Well, anyway, I went up to San Francisco, and I had lunch with Mrs. Carlos Lehder outside the AIG offices. I got letterhead, I got her signature, I got her business cards. I was writing this huge story, and the CEO of AIG, Maurice Hank Greenberg, was implicated, and I clearly tied him into it, and a guy by the name of Michael Murphy. And how many people know that just recently Hank Greenberg has been fired from AIG for cooking his books, using the same offshore companies that I was writing about in 2001. So we were several years ahead on that. As a matter of fact, I had a reporter from the Wall Street Journal call me. Here's another one from Wall Street Journal, asking for my proof that Mrs. Lehder was working at AIG. I sent it to him, and he called me back, and he kind of dropped a hint. He didn't confirm it, but the suggestion was very clear that Hank Greenberg himself was having an affair with Mrs. Carlos Lehder. Now, how many people really think that people on Wall Street tell you the truth? Okay. Coming down to more relevant stuff, in almost every lecture I've given over the last 4 years, and I've lectured in 10 countries now, I have said very clearly that the intention of the United States government with respect to Iraq was to carve it up and balkanize it exactly as was done to Yugoslavia after the fall of the former Soviet Union. I think we also have the same plans for Saudi Arabia. We'll come to that in just a few minutes. But in 2002, I wrote, amid repeated stories that the U.S. intends to balkanize the region, splitting Iraq and possibly Saudi Arabia into several kingdoms divided between Hashemite, Sunni Arab, Kurdish, and Shiite ethnic groups, tensions between Muslim countries in the regions have been steadily mounting. Then we have this story from May 20th of this year, U.S. weighs plan to make Iraq into a federation of 6 states. Why? Well, we'll cover this a little bit more later, but all the oil in Iraq is in a very thin sliver of territory running from roughly Basra in the south up to Mosul in the north. You've got a whole country to control now, and has anybody noticed we're getting our asses kicked? Seriously, in Iraq. And everybody wonders why this is happening. And all the moves by the Bush administration have really been intended and had the effect of inflaming the tensions between Shia, between Sunni, between Kurd, and everybody else, because we do intend to balkanize it, because if we have 6 separate states, then you only have to control the 2 that have oil in them. And you can bring home 100,000, or you can send your 100,000 troops to fight any one of the other countries in the world that now is dying to have a shot at us. We have a map, and that's what you will hear me use this analogy a lot. What I draw for you in this book, Crossing the Rubicon, and every month in my newsletter with some of the best writers in the world. How many subscribers to FTW are in the room tonight? How many? That needs to change. You will change this, yes, before the evening goes over, yes. We have some amazing writers at FTW. Aside from me as the publisher editor, we have Jamie Hecht, who is a PhD in English literature. He translated 3 plays of Sophocles for his PhD, but he's just a wonderful, brilliant writer and editor. But I have Stan Goff, a retired Master Sergeant from U.S. Army Special Forces who taught military science at West Point, who is my military editor. I have Dale Allen Pfeiffer, a geologist, who is my science editor, and boy, he is just a genius. I have Michael Caine, a young investigative guy in New York, and we always have really, really good writers, and we draw you a map. And the purpose of drawing you a map is so that you don't have to come to Mike Ruppert to tell you what's going on. If you all have your own maps, and you're smart enough to read maps, I know some people are map challenged, but if you all have your own map, you don't need me to explain to you what's going on. You can take world events just as surely as if I'm looking at a map and I'm eastbound on Interstate 10, leaving Tucson, I can see that the next major city is El Paso. That's the way you read maps. You know what direction you're going, you know what the landmarks are, you know the things you have to do to get from one place to another. So we have called some things right. So let's talk about this thing called peak oil. How many people have heard the term peak oil? Good. Oh, that's really good. Yeah, I am moving here. Okay. How many people believe that peak oil is real? Good. How many people believe you really understand what it means? Okay, well, I'm going to surprise you with this, but it's kind of out of the bag here now. I mean, here you see on the screen behind me from May 24th, just a few days ago, the Associated Press finally putting out a major story. We have seen the stories breaking about peak oil all over the world. Not only the Associated Press, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Oops, maybe I won't. I'll show you some more later. The Associated Press, but we've seen it on CNN, the BBC, we've seen it in Time just mentioned it. National Geographic did a huge cover story on it last June. It's coming out all over the world, and the fact is that the planet is beginning to run out of oil. Beginning to run out of oil. What most people think when you think about peak oil, they think about pouring water out of a glass. Like, we'll have oil on Monday night, but on Tuesday morning we'll wake up and the glass will be empty. Wrong. What happens, and I'll describe some of the geology of this in a minute, is that as you pass peak, every barrel of oil that you pump becomes more expensive and harder to get out of the ground, and it's inferior quality. If you go to there's a lot of agriculture. I drove around here today, and I'm still moved by the scenery that I saw. Gino and Rob and I hopped in. My father just passed away on May 9th, and he left me this beautiful Cadillac DeVille, the last thing I need going over peak oil. But it was fun riding around in it, and we drove around Josephine County and Jackson County and up to Williams, and I'm still moved by the scenery. You have a lot of agriculture around here. But you understand the concept that you pick the low-hanging fruit first. And you pick the sweetest fruit first, and you get what's easy to get first. Well, we've done that with oil. Now, peak oil, as I said, this civilization, human civilization, is hydrocarbon dependent. My dear friend Colin Campbell, who is a retired petroleum geologist who founded the Association for the Study of Peak Oil, has a great line. The great line is that with peak oil, the species Homo sapiens may not become extinct, but the subspecies of petroleum man most certainly will. And there's going to be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. Most people tend to think, especially down in LA, and I don't know what it is, maybe it's the smog in the air or wherever, but people can't seem to think. They think, okay, well now we're living in a petroleum civilization, and now I'm just going to get ready for the post-petroleum civilization, but they miss the period in between. And you have to survive, whether it's the 10, the 15, the 20, 25, 30 years in between, before you can start implementing anything that you're going to figure out how to do living without oil. And there's going to be a lot of chaos. I have developed, and I'll show you these at the end of the talk, 5 rules as we go over peak oil. 1, there is no combination of alternative energy sources anywhere that will enable current consumption and growth to continue. 2, even if there were, it takes 30 years and lots of capital investment, have you noticed the country is broke, to change an energy infrastructure. Peak oil is here now. 3, no government entity, and here I'm specifically saying federal or state, local is different. No federal or state government will do or be able to do anything to solve peak oil and energy shortages. The political system is broken. 4, until you change the way money works, you change nothing. It will be more profitable to let decline, starvation, wars, disease, and famine occur than it will be to prevent them. We call this disaster capitalism. 5, all real solutions will be place-based, local, and originate at the grassroots independent of government. Local governments will be influenced from the grassroots up. What saves you will be determined by what and who is in your own neighborhood and what kind of cooperation has been achieved there. Now let's look at peak oil. All oil production, whether it's in one oil field or one country or planet Earth as a whole, always follows a bell curve. Always. The old people in the room, like me, have seen the movie Giant with Rock Hudson and James Dean. They drill the well and it's gushing and pouring out because the oil's right up. There's one well, there's lots of pressure. You start drilling more wells and your volume of production increases as you drill more wells, but you reach a peak. And as you come down a peak, notice that they keep drilling wells, but the total production always keeps falling. Because from a geological standpoint, you have to go deeper down into the source rock, and you ultimately go into something called secondary recovery, which is where you inject water, in some cases CO2, they're doing it, that's really stupid, methane, salt water, seawater, to push the oil up to where they can get it to the wellhead, or to the bit, to push it out of the well. But as they do that, they destroy the source rock. Now they now have very aggressive, and this is one of the great myths, there are several bad myths out there. One is that technology will solve everything. And the idiots who try to tell us that this is fine say, well, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, so that's fine. So we'll just throw technology and we'll find more oil. Well, you can't find what's not there. It's not a renewable. We'll talk about discoveries in a second. So, but once you pass this peak, no matter how much money, science, effort, prayer, animal sacrifices in the backyard, I don't care. You will never produce any more oil than you do at this peak, and nothing will change that. And there is an abundance of scientific evidence to show that this is the case. The guy who came up with this originally, who is really the godfather, the grandfather, the patron saint of the peak oil movement, was a Shell geologist named M. King Hubbert, who in 1956 started compiling numbers. And he said, you know, I really think that United States oil production is going to peak in 1970. Well, they did everything but burn him at the stake. They laughed at him. They rode him out of town on rails. They called him names. I've been through some of that stuff. But you know what? He was right. He nailed it to the year, 1970. U.S. oil production peaked. Will never rise again. We have CIA documents acknowledging, they're even on my website, that the U.S. peaked in 1970, and it's not, it's not going to be possible, not in Alaska or anything else, to increase U.S. oil production. It's been in steady, steady decline since 1970. And he said a couple of interesting things. He said, production usually peaks about 40 years after discoveries peak. Bear that in mind, because we're going to have a slide on that in a second. And King Hubbert also said, you will not change anything about energy until you change the way money works. Now, let me explain why. We live in, globally, but especially in the U.S., an economic paradigm that requires infinite growth. We have fiat currency. Somebody turns a printing press, there's no real value connected to it. We have fractional reserve banking. Any bankers in the room? I forgive you. No, I'm kidding. Fractional reserve banking, meaning banks for every dollar on deposit can lend between $9 and $15, $20 based upon what the Fed reserve requirements are for the bank. And we have debt-based growth. Therefore, the current economic paradigm, in order to sustain itself, requires infinite growth. You must show growth every year. All the companies on Wall Street, if they don't show growth from one year to the next, they're stock tanks and they throw out the CEO. Now, for the past 60 years, there has been a 96, 97% correlation between economic growth, GDP growth, GNP growth, however you want to measure it, and greenhouse gas emission. Why is that? If you open a new business, somebody's got to drive a truck to bring the stuff to build it. They got to run electricity to put it all together. You got to hook up electricity and water and power, and people got to drive their cars, and you got to ship by UPS, or they got to take the stuff home. You can't have economic growth without energy. To simplify this, money represents the ability to do work. If you take a bill out of your billfold, wallet, pocket, whatever, and look at it, put it on the table in front of you, that bill can't do anything, does it? It represents something. You can exchange it for work. You can exchange it for a hamburger. You can exchange it for gasoline. You can exchange it for somebody to work for you. But that is always, the work itself is the expenditure of energy, is it not? Yes, it is. Energy is the ability to do work. So there's a direct linkage. Now, King Hubbert, as he created what's called Hubbert's curve, said that hydrocarbon production will peak. And quickly, he and other scientists started looking at some other issues. Now, he died, but hydrocarbon production per capita on the planet actually peaked in 1979. In other words, hydrocarbon energy, since 1979, we've become more efficient at using energy, but there's never been more energy produced per, why? Because the population, in case you haven't noticed, is exploding. We're at 6.5 billion people. We'll be at 9 billion people on this planet by the middle of the century if we live that long, and we may not. And you also see, now these were the predicted curves. These curves reflect the actual data. This is the oil embargo of the 1970s, and oil use declined as the prices spiked. But you can see that everything tends to be skewed back this way in time to right around here. But what you see here is global population. And this, for those of us in the peak oil movement, is what we call overshoot. Overshoot. And that's probably the most critical issue. There's a guy named Richard Duncan who I thought lived in Eugene. It might be Walter Youngquist. But some of the great heroes in the peak oil movement who've been at it a lot longer than I have said very clearly that if you want to sum everything up right now, you sum it up in terms of overpopulation. But just killing people off is not the answer, and I am not an advocate of that, although I am absolutely convinced that Dick Cheney, George Bush, the Queen of England, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, a lot of other global elites do have a plan to kill about 4 billion people. Now, why do I say that? By one means or another. This is a graph of population on the planet Earth. Roughly from the time of Christ through here, this was when they made some great advancements in wood-burning technology. This is the bubonic plague right here. Okay, this is when they went to steam, wood-burning steam. This is coal, and this is oil. In other words, the carrying capacity, are there any ecologists in the audience? The carrying capacity of the planet pre-oil was 2 billion people. If you take away the oil, is it not then axiomatic that you have a population overshoot and somebody's going to have to die? I hate to be so blunt, but I'm telling you, can you picture Henry Kissinger sitting back somewhere saying, well, the problem is not that there is too little oil, the problem is just that there are too many people. Could you see that? Yes, I certainly could. And one of the big factors of this about oil is not just the transportation. There are 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy in every calorie of food we eat. 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy in every calorie of food we eat. Why? How many farmers we got in here? Okay, you want to plant a seed, what do? You drive an oil-powered machine along the field to plow, right? And then you're burning all this gas while you're plowing as you move along. And then what do? You want to plant the seed, right? So then you turn around and you plant the seed with an oil-powered vehicle. Then what do? You got to irrigate it, right? How do you irrigate your crops? Well, this is Oregon, it rains a lot. But you got to pump water, right? Where does the energy come from to pump the water? Electricity? Where's the electricity come from? Coal, oil, or natural gas. Then you got to spray it with pesticides, don't you? What are all commercial pesticides made from? Oil. What are all commercial fertilizers made from? Natural gas. Hydrocarbons, that's oil's twin sister. Natural gas is simply oil that got cooked too much. Okay, so after you've sprayed it with oil and fertilized it with oil and pumped it with oil and planted it with oil and plowed it with oil, then you got to go back along and harvest it with another oil-powered machine. You put it in another oil-powered machine, drive it to a food processing plant where God knows what kind of chemicals they put into it. Then they burn a lot of electricity, they refrigerate it. Hey, there's more electricity. Then they wrap it in plastic. What's plastic made from? Oil. Then they drive it in another oil-powered machine to a supermarket where you drive an oil-powered machine and you reach in your wallet in most cases now and you pull out a piece of oil and you pay for it. 10 calories. That excludes cooking. That excludes cooking of hydrocarbon energy in every calorie of food. The scariest story of all the stories I have ever published on my website, and it's free now. By the way, if you have not been to my website, fromthewilderness.com, fromthewilderness.com, the way we work is about 80% of what we publish is free. I do have to pay the bills. I pay my writers. I pay them well. Our subscriber-only stories after 30 days revert to free. So our subscribers get the timely information first. And this story is now free. But there's a story on there that remains the scariest story I have ever published called Eating Fossil Fuels by Dale Allen Pfeiffer. You need to go read that if you're concerned about food supply. But this particular chart here came from a guy by the name of Norman Church in Britain. And we republished one of his stories on our website, which is a brilliant analysis also of the 10,000-mile Caesar salad. I live in Los Angeles. Southern California, we have some of the best strawberry growing territory in the world. Yet I can go to markets in Los Angeles and buy strawberries from Chile. And why is it that they mine tin in Australia, ship it to first to Germany to be fashioned into tin cans, then to Norway to be filled with sardines, then to Britain for the labeling, and then they ship it back to the markets? Globalization is dead, those of you concerned about globalization. 70% of all transportation fuel is oil. You take away the oil, or you see oil at $100, $200 a barrel, and that's coming. That's coming, not too far off. They won't be able to support a 10,000-mile Caesar salad or a 6,000-mile strawberry. You know, I was up in Eugene, and they're growing grass seed over there, which is being shipped to China. Now that's going to change, because sometime in the near future, communities like Eugene and Ashland hopefully will be growing stuff to feed Ashland and Eugene. You know, that's the way it should be. That's good. Well, you're going to be doing more of it, I hope. Oil discoveries peaked in 1962. 1962. M. King Hubbard said about 40 years after your discovery's peak, you go over the peak of production. Now, to put this in perspective, for the last 2 years that have been completed, 2003, 2004, according to IHS Energy Consultants in Denver, which is the sine qua non, they're the standard, there has not been a single discovery anywhere in the world of a field of 500 million barrels of oil or greater. Now, to put that in perspective, the planet is using 1 billion barrels of oil every 11.5 days. They didn't find one field with a 6-day supply for the entire planet for the last 2 years. They didn't find a single field with a 6-day supply for the entire planet over the last 2 years. Okay, so we aren't going to find any more oil, and I'm going to prove to you, because one of my mantras, one of the things I teach as I lecture and my subscribers is follow the money. Of course, we've just heard, somebody else just got famous. Mark Felt just came out as Deep Throat, and he follow the money. You watch how the money works and you learn, because I'm going to show you in a minute that the oil companies know damn well that there's no more oil to find. I'm going to prove that to you here in just a second. But so there is no more oil to find anywhere. They might know where some is, but considering the fact that it takes about anywhere between 2 and 7 years, but the average is 3 to 5 years to bring a so-called mega field online, because once you find the oil, it takes a lot of development. You got to throw a lot of money and a lot of capital into bringing the field online. We know what fields have been discovered. We know what stages they're in. So we know a wonderful organization called ODAC, the Oil Depletion Analysis Center in Great Britain, has compiled the list of all the fields that are in development. They know what's coming online. Of course, we know what demand is. It's now about 83 million barrels a day. 2007, it might be close to 87 million barrels a day, or even greater than that. But we know now that by 2007, there are absolute gross mathematical numerical shortfalls in oil availability, period. 2007. That's about a year and a half away. Human civilization starts to fall apart at the seams. It's already hitting. The Philippines are going to a 4-day work week because they don't have enough energy to keep the lights on. There's blackouts in Thailand. There's blackouts in Australia and New Zealand. There's been blackouts. Remember the blackouts, the big ones in Italy last year? Do you remember the big one in New England in 2003? I stood on the stage in Cancun, Mexico. I think that's where I first met Gino in 2003. And 6 weeks before the New England blackout happened, I predicted it. Why? You could just watch natural gas storage figures. Now, gas is a little bit different than oil because it gets harder and harder and harder to pump oil out of the ground. But gas is, when there's no more pressure, it just kind of goes off a cliff. Now, something like 87% of all new wells, gas wells drilled in this country now are dry within the first year. That's according to the Texas Railroad Commission, which for those of you in the oil biz, you know that that's the place where they keep the big numbers on oil, the secret numbers on oil. And the problem there is that now what the major media will tell you, what the White House will tell you is that nobody's investing in infrastructure. That's right. Nobody's, because the population's growing, demand is growing. You know, you've heard the economy grew at a robust 2% last year. Bush is wondering, you know, screaming about the wonderful McJobs he's created for everybody. But they're not building any more infrastructure. Why? I will quote the words of the world's largest energy investment banker, Matthew Simmons, who I've interviewed many times, of Simmons & Company. His clients include the World Bank, Halliburton, and Kerr-McGee. He's a Republican, he's a friend of George Bush, but he talks to me. Not so much anymore, not since this book came out, but that's all right. I just saw him in Edinburgh, Scotland, and his attitude changed. That's the first time I'd seen him since the book came out. But he's going to be a disaster capitalist, but he's been very frank about peak oil. And he says the reason nobody's going to build any more energy infrastructure is because the return on investment is uncertain. Why would you put $3 billion into a refinery, or $5 billion or $20 billion into your state into building new power generating stations if you know that there's not going to be anything to power them with and you won't get your money back? And I'm going to show you how that plays out. But it's hitting now all over the world, under your very noses now. Let's look at some of the things that are happening. China is already consuming or hoarding 60% of the world's commodities: oil, cement, aluminum, copper, zinc, manganese, steel, coal, gold, silver, etc. China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, India, Brazil, Malaysia, South Africa, Europe, parts of West Africa are forging economic alliances which exclude the U.S. The whole world is turning on us. We are Gulliver, in case you hadn't noticed, and the Lilliputians are pissed off. Tensions between Japan and China are increasing. That's an understatement since I put that up. China and Canada have just signed an oil pact. Did you know that? China's buying Canadian oil. Who's the largest oil supplier to the United States? Our first largest foreign supplier of oil. Canada. China is experiencing blackouts and threatening to shut down businesses that consume too much energy. We'll get to that in a minute. They're having blackouts all over China right now. Their economy is growing at 8%. It's a runaway train. The planet is a runaway train, I'm sorry. South Africa is predicting permanent blackouts by 2010. I have source information for all of this in case anybody disputes me. I put 1,000 footnotes in this book. I don't ask anybody to take my word. I back it up. I don't make this stuff up. Australia and New Zealand are experiencing energy shortages. Thailand, the UK, Britain. I just got back from Britain. Do you know they have 50,000 deaths a year in Britain from people who freeze to death? They're all pensioners, as they call them, retirees. And the pensioners live in buildings where you have to put coins in the meter to get heat. So on a daily basis, as energy costs rise, they decide, do I want to starve to death today or would I rather freeze? 50,000 deaths a year, and the number is increasing. Britain is on the end of a long energy supply train, and Britain will have to join the EU. Don't worry about this last vote on the EU, you political scientists. They're going to rewrite it. It's going to have to happen. Because Britain can only survive as a nation. Well, that's excluding climate collapse. We'll talk about that a little bit later. See, I told you I'd talk about cheery stuff. I am going to give you some good stuff here. The good news. Britain will have to go with Europe because Europe will be saved from freezing only with Russian natural gas. And that pipelines have to run through Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, Germany, out to the North Sea, or across France, across the tunnel. And that's the only way. And the poor Irish, well, they can make booze and they'll probably stay fairly warm that way, but they won't be cooking much. I love the Irish. I love Scotland too. Okay, the EU has decided to lift its ban on arms sales to China. Texaco's CEO has announced that world oil supply cannot meet demand. That's a big one. Texaco's CEO. Russia has shifted to a basket of currencies emphasizing the euro. We're going to talk a lot about economics tonight. Venezuela is buying MiG-29s and Russian missiles, forming a defense pact with Brazil and preparing for a proxy war with Colombia. We're going to see a lot of proxy wars in the near future. Syria and Iran are receiving Russian and Chinese military assistance. The housing bubble is starting to collapse. How many people really get that there is such a thing as a housing bubble in this country? We're going to talk about that. My God. I'm going to show you some things that are going to scare you. You know there are 3 times more paper mortgages out there than there are physical properties? Why? Because Wall Street is forming things called pools of mortgage-backed securities and trading them like stocks and mutual funds. The Fed and the Treasury are doing nothing to change any of this. The U.S. government, the Treasury, and the Fed are doing nothing to stop the trends. They're betting on China. They're betting on China. And most U.S. equity has already moved there or offshore. Now, this is the first thing that most people get as they rely on conventional wisdom. Why would George Bush and Dick Cheney want to wreck the U.S. economy? Well, first of all, let me ask you a question. How many people in this room believe that the Great Depression, starting in 1929, was actually a loss of wealth? It was a wealth transfer from the poor to the rich. And now I'm going to lapse into George Carlin here for a minute, okay? The reason why I'm going to do that is because he used the word shit, and I got to talk about shit, okay? If you look at this country, you are in such deep shit with your debt, you can't buy any more shit. Besides that, you got no place to put any more shit. In the meantime, overseas, you got all these people who ain't got no shit that want your shit. And the whole thing is being funded because the people overseas are lending you money so that you can buy their shit so you can have more shit and put it on your credit card and you're in deep shit. The wealth, the mega wealth has moved out of this country, and the country is being set up for a total economic collapse. And it's going to start in the third and fourth quarters of this year. And I'll be as right as rain on that because I got the map. I have some great teachers, including Catherine Austin Fitz, a very dear friend of mine. I'm going to talk about her a lot. Former Assistant Secretary of Housing, a past Managing Director at Dillon Reed, an MBA from the Wharton School of Business, and she's been my economic mentor, and she's fabulous. And she and I have made some fabulous music. But now let's look at China again, because China's like the end game, if we get that far. China's not only consuming most of the world's commodities, it's stockpiling and hoarding them. In 2004, they bought or consumed half the world's cement, interfering with the building projects in the US. In 2004, China purchased twice as much copper as the rest of the world combined. What's copper good for? Electrical wiring. In 2004, China purchased almost 1/3 of the world's coal and is currently experiencing massive coal shortages, massive. In 2004, China purchased 90% of the world's steel output. Steel output. China is currently holding $1.9 trillion in US currency and T-bills. Now China will be, let me just stop right there for a second. Now, who can think of a reason why China would want to buy all these things and ship them to China now? Because it's going to cost 20 times as much to ship that heavy stuff to China in 5 years or 2 years. They're shipping it while they can afford the oil prices, and they're hoarding it now. 70% of the world's transportation is fueled by oil. How many ships you think are going to be crossing with loads of steel when oil's at $105 a barrel, as Goldman Sachs has just predicted? So they're hoarding it now. Now China's currency, the yuan or the renminbi, those terms are interchangeable, has been pegged at, I think it's 8.4 to the dollar for a long time, which has given China a leg up. But it's also given you a great leg up as you go out to buy all your Chinese goodies from Walmart. Is there a Walmart in Ashland? No. I'm definitely moving to Ashland. Yeah. And I make a vow that whenever I can buy anything after I get here from somebody who works in Ashland that's made in Ashland, that's where I'm spending my money. When China floats the yuan, which the Treasury and the Senate and the Bush administration are really putting pressure on it to do, it's going to make things better for the Bush administration because it will kind of cut the foreign trade deficit. We have twin deficits that are eating us alive. The foreign trade deficit, or the current accounts deficit, and the federal deficit. They're both absolutely, totally out of control. You're going to see in a minute, I'm going to talk about GM stock. How many people know that GM stock has been downgraded to junk status? And so is Ford's. Okay? GM is on the brink of bankruptcy. Very quick way to analyze that too. I love economists. Economists talk and they make you want to think like they're Darth Vader or a Jedi Knight. They use terms so that you can't possibly understand what they're talking about. It's not that complicated. The way GM got into junk status was very simple. If you have the market cap of GM, I'm just going to make up a number, at 300 million, or let's say $300 billion. But GM issues bonds. Now, in the financial markets, stocks are equity, that's ownership of the company, and bonds are debt. Well, if you add up the bonds of GM, they're like 5 times as much as all the stock is worth. That's why GM's bonds are being downgraded to junk status. There's very little likelihood that those bonds, those debts are going to be paid off. So when China floats the yuan, every Chinese product is going to go up by 40% or so, depending upon how much they decide. They might do it in steps. Your dollar is going to be worth less. Of course, the dollar is going to have a death throw here, but they're controlling the markets right now. But the dollar is going to crash, and there are great experts saying floating the yuan isn't going to help anybody but the government. But they're trying to sell that to you. And peak oil production has already hit every nation in the world except Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia, I think, is overpeaked. And I have to rewrite this because just in the last 2 months, we've seen confirmation that Ghawar, you might want to remember that name, Ghawar, G-H-A-W-A-R, the largest oil field ever found, estimated at 90 billion barrels of oil in one field, has gone over peak. Now, why is that important? 25% of all the known recoverable reserves on the planet, oil reserves on the planet, are in Saudi Arabia. 25%. I'm going to show you something else in a few minutes that's going to really shock you. But if Gawar has peaked, Saudi Arabia has peaked. It is axiomatic then that if Saudi Arabia has peaked, planet Earth has peaked. And we're starting to see the signs come out and the confirmation come out. 18 of the largest 25 largest oil-producing nations in the world have already passed peak and are in permanent decline now. Now. Crude oil prices have doubled since September the 11th. Now, not all the world is ignorant about peak oil. I just came back from Britain, and I'm pleased to announce a couple of things. One is that I met with the bureau chief of Al Jazeera in London when I was there. Al Jazeera, by the way, is the Arab television network, which has a viewing audience of somewhere around 200 million people or more, all the way from Indonesia and Malaysia through the Middle East. They do some great reporting. They're barred from Saudi Arabia. Saudi government will not let an Al Jaz reporter in the country. They're doing a 4-hour special on 9/11 for the 4th anniversary. I'm in 2 of the 4 hours, all the end credits and every commercial, which means I'll probably get shot before it airs, but that's fine. Al Jaz is doing that, and the BBC is soon doing a story on insider trading on the financial markets connected to 9/11, and they're taking all of it from here. I'm pleased to announce that. But a lot of people understand about peak oil because this is a BBC viewer poll saying, what do you want us to cover? There's peak oil, 32.16%. But far and away, nothing even came close in the viewer poll about what people in Britain wanted to hear about. Gloom gathers over the world economy. Gasoline prices going up. The San Francisco Chronicle has actually been doing some excellent reporting on peak oil lately. IMF warns on risk of permanent oil shock. And now, a permanent shock, is that not an oxymoronic combination of words? Permanent oil shock, yes. Now, this is from the Financial Times. For those of you who know anything about money, the Financial Times is probably one of the 4 or 5 most respected economic publications on the planet. Inevitable oil squeeze draws near, also from an excellent paper, Christian Science Monitor. They do very good reporting. They always have. Global race is on to snag oil supplies. Now, right after 9/11, that's from the Seattle Times, I said in Crossing the Rubicon, I said in my video, Truth and Lies of 9/11, in November of 2001, what we are witnessing at September the 11th, which was the pretext that the U.S. government needed, was a war to control, a sequential war to control the last remaining oil supplies on the planet. There's a headline from the Seattle Times. Energy body wants brakes on fuel consumption. How many people have heard of the International Energy Agency? You will, a lot of you will, I guarantee it. It is a UN-sanctioned body. The signatories creating the IEA under treaty include the G7 nations, and under the treaty, the IEA has the power in any of the G7 nations to impose mandatory gas rationing, curfews, to say that only even numbered license plates can drive on even numbered days and odd numbers on odd days. They can limit gasoline purchases to 10 gallons, all by fiat. And it just came out, again, Al Jazeera reported it. Adam Porter, who writes for Al Jaz, is this great British guy who is a really wonderful friend of mine. He's the best reporter out there on peak oil. IEA just dusted off these plans, and they're trying to, not trying, they're actually moving these plans through the heads of state of all the G7 nations right now so that they're on the table and dusted off. Financial Times even commented on this. Again, this can be announced at any moment under the right circumstances or the right pretext. Why? Because there is no elasticity anywhere in the oil production system today. There's no give. In other words, every drop that can be pumped right now is being consumed almost immediately. So, if we have another bombing of a pipeline in Iraq, if we go to war with Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, if there is a revolt in Nigeria, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you take 500,000, 1 million barrels a day out of the system, the rubber band breaks. Elasticity is gone. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk a lot about Hugo Chavez, who I actually happen to like a great deal. U.S. report acknowledges peak oil threat. Finally, a report emerged from out of the US government, acknowledging the peak oil threat. But this is the scary part. It came from a company called Science Applications International Corporation. Anybody ever heard of SAIC? There are more CIA, NSA, spies, government spooks, crooks, you name it, high-tech guys in that company. They really have a lot to do with the internet. They owned Internic for a while. They're a very high-tech firm. Admiral Bobby Ray Inman's on their board. He was a former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, up to be the CIA director for a while. This report just came out of SAIC. I obtained a copy of it. Here's an interesting quote that Adam Porter and I both found at about the same time. This is buried in the report, but it says, the authors of the report also dismiss the power of the markets to solve any peak. Let's take that sentence by sentence. Free markets, actually the free market economy is worsening and hastening peak. Because right now, anytime there's a slack in supply and the prices drop, every country in the world burns more oil to accelerate their economies to get more dollars to buy more oil. Or to build more tanks, ships, planes, guns, and all that stuff. They call for the intervention of governments, but also they rather worryingly point to a need to exclude public debate and environmental concerns from the process. They say this is needed to speed up decision making. SAIC is saying we don't have time to tell the people what's going on. We got to make decisions for them right now, and we don't have time for them to question or examine our processes, our priorities, or anything else. We're just going to make the decisions. The problem is not that there's too little oil. The problem is just that there are too many people. Chevron's, whoa! I only pushed it once. Chevron's Texaco CEO banking on peak oil situation. This is how we find the scientific proof in behavior of peak oil. Chevron Texaco, the CEO just wrote a check because their profits are up and they've been holding their profits for $16.4 billion to buy Unocal. That's because the Chinese offered $13 billion in cash to buy the company last December. But that's because Chevron knows there's no place else to get oil. So how are oil companies adding to reserves? They're just buying other companies' reserves. They aren't discovering anymore. He's banking on peak oil. And I love this little thing, and this is small because this is the way it was in the Exxon report. Basically what this says is, a little footnote in the Exxon report is that Exxon acknowledges that peak oil may occur in just 5 years. Well, we believe it's happening right now, but ExxonMobil has acknowledged it. World's thirst for oil makes falling output worse, and this is the horrible, horrible. There are two great essays that I wrote, I think they're great, on my website called, first of all, As the World Burns, and the second is Global Corp. And Global Corp is the most recent because if you look at the economic paradigm that we live in, with disaster capitalism, making more money by killing people than by saving people's lives, more money by running down your quality of life and the world's environment and everything else, that what will finally happen at the moment when the climate collapses, the human race goes extinct, we blow ourselves up, there will ultimately be the final merger and acquisition resulting in one corporation, Global Corp, before the whole human race ceases to exist. And the chief financial officer and the CEO will go, hooray, we did it! And they will believe that they have achieved success because every slack now in oil price only makes consumption go up. Now, is there fraud in the house of Saud? Yeah, this is from MSNBC. Now, Matt Simmons reported some time ago, and I actually reported it after coming back from a peak oil conference in Paris in 2003, that, hey gang, it looks like Saudi Arabia's peaked. And now we're finding the situation where Sheikh Ali Naimi of Saudi Arabia, the oil minister, and OPEC and the Saudi guys saying, well, we have enough oil to keep the world going for 50, 100 years easily. We just need to invest money and drill it, but I assure you that our reserves are intact. And that's first of all and foremost because if the House of Saud acknowledged to the Saudi population that they had passed peak and Ghawar was starting to collapse, and their production was falling, that means the handouts, the social subsidies, the social welfare programs, and the graft and corruption for I don't know how many thousands of princes would go away. You would see the kingdom disintegrate. And by the way, I should add that we know that Ghawar and all the Saudi fields and most of the fields in the Middle East now are into a new form of secondary recovery called bottle brush recovery, which is where you drill down, then you turn the drill sideways. And as the drill comes along sideways, you have what look like sprinkler heads underneath the oil field, which are injecting seawater to pump it up. And there are good numbers now that I have seen showing that Ghawar is at 55% water cut, which means that 55% of what they pump out every day is the same seawater they put in that morning. But what that does geologically is it destroys and collapses the reservoir. They had it happen in Oman and I think Kuwait in a couple of fields. When they hit 75 or 80% water cut, the field just collapsed, and that was the last oil. There will always be oil in the ground. That's good news. Always be oil in the ground, forever. Why? Because an oil field is deemed dry when it takes more oil to get a barrel of oil out of the ground than you get from burning it. Make sense? When you burn more energy to get 1 barrel of oil than you get from the barrel of oil, there's no point in going after the barrel of oil. So there's lots of fraud in the House of Saud. They're lying. Now, the Saudis are running to the U.S. and the West saying, well, the problem is you are not building refineries, right? Because you've probably heard that story. U.S. needs to build more refineries, and that's the real reason why gasoline prices are so high. But remember that line about return on investment? Now, again, 2002, almost 3 years ago, I wrote a story on Saudi Arabia and the dynamics in the kingdom. King Fahd of Saudi Arabia had a stroke in '96. I've got great stories showing that he's been on life support in Malacca. They just keep him on the bed. You know, he hasn't opened his eyes. Now, the Saudi papers put out stories, well, he just had cataract surgery, which Saudi, I guess they can do for a Saudi king, even if he's brain dead. But there's a story, but the problem is that when King Fahd dies, you got a problem, because then you have the Crown Prince Abdullah, who was like 76 or 77 years old, and then the next in line is Prince Sultan, who was like 74 years old or something like that, and they don't like each other, and they're rivals for the throne. And Prince Sultan controls the National Guard, by far the largest military element in the country. Prince Abdullah controls the military, the Army and the Air Force. They don't like each other. Abdullah doesn't necessarily like the U.S. Then you got all these princes that are fighting and jockeying over this shrinking pie in this kingdom that's really teetering on this enormous corruption with an unhappy restive population, a middle class. Saudi Arabia is in for a big mess. And just recently, last week as a matter of fact, Saudi king in hospital for tests. And what I said 3 years ago, you watch for the moment when King Fahd dies, because then you're going to find out what's really going on in Saudi Arabia. And what they said, aside from the fact that he's had cataract surgery, was that fluid was building in his lungs. Any doctors in the room? When fluid starts building in your lungs and you're old, you're dying. That's the onset of pneumonia from which you do not recover. I buried both of my parents. My father just died May 9th, and I had to pull the plug on him after a massive stroke. King Fahd's going. Now, what we'll find out then is whether Saudi Arabia is going to explode or whether some kind of deal has been cut. But I have said for a long time, and mark my words on this, because I said it in this story 3 years ago, the one I just showed you, that we intend to balkanize Saudi Arabia. Why? Because all of Saudi's oil, 25% of the oil on the planet, is in a very thin sliver of land along the eastern seaboard of Saudi Arabia. So we just carve that up and make the United Arab Emirates of Aramco. Works. And that's all we have to protect. So here's Saudi Arabia saying, we can supply the world with all the oil it needs. We only need $623 billion in foreign investment. Notice they aren't putting their own money up, and they have a lot of it. That's the catch, so that they have an out when they say, gee, instead of saying we can't increase production, we say it's because you guys in the West didn't invest your money. And the guys in the West are saying, we're not going to put our money into that. You ain't going to find nothing down there. By the way, Saudi Arabia has, over the course of the last 6 months, upped production about 100,000 barrels a day, all of heavy sour oil. You know there are grades of oil? You know, there's light sweet, Texas mid-grade, Brent, you know, crude, you know, and they're all graded like scotches, you know, and, you know, the light sweets are really good. You can make gasoline out of that really easily. The heavy sours are like stinky, poopy, hard, thick, blech, right? Now, about 95% of the refineries in the world cannot make gasoline out of heavy sour oil. It's great if you want to make asphalt. We don't need any more asphalt. Although the U.S., in case you didn't know, is now in the largest expansion of the federal highway system in 50 years. Why? It's a political handout to all the cronies that put Bush in office, giving your taxpayer dollars to all the crooks that put him in office. They know there's not going to be anything to drive on these roads. They're just handing the money out. Saudi Arabia seeks $623 billion. But then it says, OPEC states may link oil exploration to refineries from Bloomberg. I know how to read the media. The fact is not so much that the media lies to you, it's that they headline with Michael Jackson. And in most stories analyzing something, you find the truth in the last 5 or 10% of the story, if it's a print story. You find the real what should be the headline in paragraph 27 out of 30 paragraphs. And we know how to scan the websites because the powers that be know how to read the websites because they make their decisions, so the information that gets put out is accurate. But you got to know how to separate, pardon my French, the ice cream from the bullshit. All right? OPEC states may link oil exploration to refineries. Sure, we'll go find all this oil we're telling you that we have that we don't really have, as long as you build a whole bunch more refineries. Well, the guys in the West aren't going to build any more refineries because here's the true U.S. refinery picture from Bloomberg. There are 146 operating oil refineries in the U.S. with capacity to process 16.9 million barrels of crude a day, according to DOE. That compares with 324 refineries with a capacity of 18.6 million barrels in 1981. Are you getting the picture? They've known for a long time that there's not going to be any more oil. There's no secret oil stash. There's no abiotic magical oil springing up from the core of the earth, limitless supply. Horsepucky. If there was, they'd be building the refineries to cope with increasing demand in the world population because they're in business to make money, aren't they? But they ain't building the refineries because they know it's throwing money away. The number of U.S. refineries dropped by half during the past 25 years as low profit margins and stricter environmental rules, blah, blah, blah. The last refinery built in the U.S. was Marathon Plant in Garyville, Louisiana in 1976. A new refinery would cost $2 to $3 billion. President of Baker and O'Brien. Now, here's your pop quiz. Who is the Baker of Baker and O'Brien? James Baker, the oil man, the guy who helped steal the 2000 presidential election, the former Secretary of State and good friends with the Bush family. Nobody's going to invest that kind of money. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so we get most of our oil from Canada's first, Mexico is second, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. All those countries are in decline. Canada is important because of something called tar sands. How many people have heard about tar sands? We'll talk about that in a minute too. But Mexico has also peaked. Now, look at this. Everybody says, what about Russia? Here's from Russia itself. Russia may stop exporting energy sources by 2010. They're going over peak now. There are actually two peaks. One when we first collapsed their economy at the end of the Cold War, which destroyed their infrastructure and their ability to produce oil. And now Vladimir Putin is pumping oil hand over fist, getting all the cash he can, building up. Putin's 100 times smarter than Bush, you know, when he's asleep. But Russia is not going to be a solution for long. It's certainly not going to solve the world's problems. Neither is, oops, how come that keeps coming up again? Okay. Norway, a founding member of OPEC. Overall, I think the 5th or 6th largest exporter in the world. Norway is going over peak. They're going into decline. Venezuela is going into decline. But there's key things that have to do with geography relevant to all these countries. And I hope I have the slide. Oops, I don't have the slide. Maybe it's in another show. But Cantarell, the second largest oil field in the world. What country is Cantarell in? Anybody know? Mexico. Cantarell just went into decline. Mexico is in decline. You know, Mexico is actually importing natural gas from the U.S. And the U.S. is importing most of its natural gas from Canada. Now, in Washington, they say, we only get 15% of our natural gas from Canada. Actually, it's up to about 18 or 19% now. Goes up every year. That's true, but that's half of Canada's natural gas production every year. Canada is worse than, Canada's not even a state. Canada's a colony of the United States. And I've been to Canada many times, and I love the Canadian people. And when the draft comes, even though Canada will not hide draft evaders, Canada will ship them right back. We'll come to that later. I know the Canadian people will risk their lives to hide deserters, AWOLs, and young men and women who don't want to be drafted. And we ought to thank them for that. So, and I love this. Crime probe, they just had a blackout in Moscow. Did you hear about this? That shut down everything in Moscow? Their stock exchange, the banks, the police departments. It was as big as the New England blackout. You didn't hear about it, did you? Okay, but I love, this is so Russian. What do? Crime probe. Putin says, blackout, go out, shoot somebody. People will understand. It's good. Put somebody in jail. Put someone on trial. Don't tell them there is shortage. Just put someone in jail now. That's Russian. That's so Russian. Okay, Dostoevsky would love that. Crime probe after Moscow blackout. Okay, so this was just from, do I have the date on here? Yes, down at the bottom. 5/25, May 25th. That's just a few days ago. Okay, world blackouts may grow as investment stalls. Have I covered this for you already? That's from Reuters. Now, Richard Duncan, one of the great prophets, has a paper coming out which is currently under peer review. It's been under peer review now for, I think, 3 months. And I spoke to Richard Duncan not too long ago. He wrote a great paper called The Road to the Olduvai Gorge, which is where human civilization, or where humans actually first started doing things. And he says that's where we're heading back to. But this new paper analyzes the cliff event, production, gas, and everything else, because we live in a complex society. Look at the highlighted part. The electrical epidemic spreads nationwide, then worldwide, and by circa 2007, that's a year and a half, most of the blackouts are permanent. The modern way of life is history by circa 2025. Postulate 2 of the Olduvai theory states energy production per capita will decline exponentially from the cliff event circa 2008 to 2030, meaning declining from 2008 through 2030. If that is true, then the population of the world's industrial nations, we argue, will go from about 3.3 billion in 2008 to about 0.9 billion in 2030, a net die-off of about 300,000 people per day in the 22 years from 2008 to 2030. This is serious. We live in a complex society. And the more complex societies get, the more things can go wrong. A hummingbird can sneeze someplace and it can cause, a train to derail. There is a law of chaos. Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, I love him talking about the law of chaos, But the fact is that the more complex societies get, the more clear the risks as these mechanisms start to fail. There's 2 classic examples. I'm going to give you a bit of good news now, because I don't want you all to go running out and get high or something. Have a drink, whatever. Both Cuba and North Korea lost their oil when the Soviet Union collapsed. Aside from the climatological difference, there are major structural economic reasons why North Korea is starving and Cuban food production is increasing every year. North Korea is a top-down, hierarchically, rigidly organized, absolutely fascistic American system. And the way they did it, of course, was, they have to take some natural gas away from electricity production to make fertilizer to keep the farmhands from starving, so that they're having blackouts, but when they have a blackout, a train derails, which runs into a dam. That's the way North Korea works, okay? On the other hand, Cuba has done exactly what Catherine Austin Fitts in her program Solari. And everybody who's interested in about the money and how it works needs to go to her website, which is www.solari.com. Cuba has essentially formed, without calling it that, neighborhood stock corporations, where stock value is determined on the quality of life in a neighborhood going up rather than down. Fitz tells this great story about when she was a kid, the Dow Jones was at 800, and what she calls the Popsicle Index. And the Popsicle Index is on a scale from 0 to 100 in your neighborhood. What are the chances that a 5-year-old could walk from your home to the closest store and buy a popsicle and return home safely? Okay, she says when she was a kid, the Popsicle Index was 95, the Dow was 800. Now the Dow is 10,000, the Popsicle Index is 30, you know, okay? She flips that economic model. All value generates from place, from locality, and she divides it into an A share, B share model. A share, B shares. A shares get to vote, B shares don't. Only the people in the neighborhood get A shares. A lot of people can come in and invest. They can make a lot of money, but only the people in the neighborhood get to vote the shares. And the share value only goes up if the quality of life in the neighborhood goes up. Cuba did that. Cuba did that by having little co-ops in every neighborhood. I've spoken to people recently who've been in Havana. Every vacant lot is covered with tomatoes and celery and onions, and they're feeding their neighborhoods, and food production, organic food production, is increasing, and the Cuban diet has been steadily improving over the last 15 years because they changed the way money works. You will change nothing until you change the way money works. So this is what Duncan's talking about here, and this is what I want us to start preparing for. Fueling America's dirty future. These are the tar sands. Now basically what tar sands are, it's not really oil, it's a bitumen liquid that's very thick, gooey, sticky, ugly. It's like, you know, stepping on tar that you can't get off your shoes. You ever done that? But it's lodged in sand. And it's hard to imagine the scale of this photograph. Okay, take a look at one of these dump trucks. A 6-foot man comes up halfway on one of the tires of the dump truck. This is strip mining. Can you imagine what it's doing to the ecology in Canada? Because you wash this off, and there are other pictures in here that show that, you know, you produce this massive poisonous, toxic water. You destroy the landscape, but you can turn this into oil. And that's what China's after. Now here's a clue. If there was an infinite supply of oil, why is China just committed to help build a $2.5 billion pipeline from Alberta to Prince Ruppert Island, no relation, near Vancouver, so that China can buy the oil? Why is China buying equity stakes in Alberta oil companies? Because they know there's no place else to get the oil. Now, the Canadians and the tar sand people are touting that, you know, there's hundreds of billions of barrels and you shouldn't worry because tar sands will solve everything. Well, okay, here's one of the problems with that. I didn't have the slide in here, but you see this? This is how they get the oil out of the tar sands. They boil water and spray high-pressure steam on the tar sands to wash the oil out. Well, how do they boil the water? Natural gas. Now, the folks up in Alberta have just come up with a novel idea. They say, we'll just build 2 nuclear reactors to generate the steam. What do you do with the plutonium? The world is rushing to nuclear hand over fist, and it's stupid for many reasons. We'll see in a second. There's not enough uranium around to make all the reactors, and it takes so much energy to make a nuclear reactor. This is a question everybody must ask themselves when you're considering an alternative energy source, or what you think is an alternative energy source. Hydrogen is an absolute chimera. It is one of the worst and cruelest jokes that's being foisted upon the people as a solution. In California, we have Governor Schwarzenegger, right? I'll build a hydrogen highway. Sure, we build gas stations every 50 miles. I pump you up, you know, with hydrogen, yeah, you drive on your way, you know. The University of California released a study a few years ago. It takes 1,113 gallons of gaseous hydrogen to give you the same energy in 1 gallon of gasoline. Hydrogen is 1 proton and 1 electron. It bleeds through most metals, and the metals it doesn't bleed through, it turns brittle and it cracks. You can't plug hydrogen into a natural gas pipeline. Well, first of all, then you're taking the natural gas away from somebody. So, you know, we have done a lot of scientific work and published a lot. Everything we do is academically footnoted with regard to energy. And Dale wrote some great stories, and this hydrogen company calls up, threatened to sue me. We have proven that you cannot say that hydrogen won't work. We have proven that on 1 tank of compressed hydrogen, 300 gallons of compressed hydrogen, no, it was more than that. It was like 80, 100 gallons. You can get 300 miles. And I said, great, who's going to do the crash tests? Hydrogen is explosive. Would you drive in a car with, you know, with a couple 100 gallons of compressed hydrogen waiting to be hit from someplace? Do you know that Electric Vehicle Magazine just released a study about 6 months ago showing that the average hydrogen fuel cell, the life expectancy of a hydrogen fuel cell engine at current technology is 200 hours. Now, how would you like to buy a new engine for your hydrogen fuel cell car after 200 hours of use? Hydrogen is an insult. It may have some local applications. It may have some place-based applications in a home where you can, convert solar perhaps into some electrolysis to generate hydrogen. It has nothing to do with transportation. But here's the other key to all of this. Let's assume tomorrow, let's assume right now today, suddenly a guy walked in and he was absolutely right. I have the absolute source of infinite energy, whether it's cold fusion or zero-point energy. Zero-point energy has been proven to be real. But the last guy I saw, Colonel Tom Bearden, who had demonstrated, said, I have absolutely no idea how to turn it into anything mechanically useful. All right, but let's say the guy walks in today. Now, there are between 750 million and 800 million internal combustion-powered vehicles on planet Earth. So what do you got to do? You got to build 750 to 800 million new vehicles. Do you know that it takes 12% of all the oil, hydrocarbon energy that a vehicle will use in its lifetime to make a car? You got to mine the ore, you got to transport it to the smelter, you got to melt it. After you melt it, you got to form it, you got to transport it to the plant, you got to run it down a production line. The paints are all made from oil. You know, National Geographic, there are 7 gallons of oil in every tire. So the question you must always ask when it comes to alternative energy sources is a question called net energy. Energy return on energy invested. Until you do the math, you are deluding yourself. And I would submit, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have time to delude ourselves here. The Titanic has been hit, and I use the Titanic analogy all the time anyway. Okay? It takes 30, according to Professor David Goodstein, the Vice Chancellor of the California Institute of Technology, it takes 30 years to change an energy infrastructure, not counting the capital cost. Assuming we had new energy, it would take 30 years to build a new infrastructure to deliver this energy. And in case you haven't noticed, we don't have that kind of time. We don't have 30 months until 2007. So here's the tar sands, and we're burning, steam. And now this is a map I did, and I'd like to thank Congressman Roscoe Bartlett of Maryland, who just showed this map on the floor of the House of Representatives, along with there are a lot of other people out doing great work besides me. By the way, in case you don't know, Mark Rabinowitz, Mark, stand up, I'm doing this to you now. Mark is a brilliant writer. He lives up in Eugene. His website is www.oilempireus, and he's a great thinker on the subject of peak oil, and he is doing some great work on permaculture. He's affiliated with a group called Permatopia. Believes that we can feed more people with less frankenfood and less oil energy by starting to convert back to, of course, it's not going to happen globally, but there are a lot of people out there doing this work. And this was one of the things that Congressman Bartlett showed on the floor of the House of Representatives. Now, you see this triangle here, right there? 60% of all the known oil on the planet is inside that triangle. 60%. Now, isn't it strange, after 9/11, we put our armies all around here? That's a coincidence. Now, some of these little symbols, I just haven't had time to keep this updated. I mean, it's blowing up faster than I can put new symbols on here. These are flashpoints where there's conflict. Now we have, ringing Russia, we have major violence and suppression in Kyrgyzstan. We now have riots in Uzbekistan, in Georgia. We got problems in Ukraine. So we're encircling Russia, which is what the intent has always been. This region, of course, all of this is going on in here. This little symbol here is the symbol for the yuan, and that's the Indian currency. And this is where China is investing in energy around the world. Kind of interesting to watch that. Why? Because China has all the money. Remember? They own all our T-bills, and they're lending us the money. And they can pull a plug on our economy, and they're trying to buy everything they can buy overseas. China has a lot of problems on their own. Believe me, tons. West Africa is very critical to understand, and we're going to have major problems in Venezuela. But here's the key thing I want you to get out of this map. We're up here. It takes 6 weeks to get a drop of oil from there into an American gas tank. It takes 2 weeks to get a drop of oil from there into an American gas tank, and it takes 4 days to get a drop of oil from Venezuela into an American gas tank. Considering that there's no elasticity, the distance traveled is also extremely important. Accessibility to oil, even if there's smaller reserves. This is what's happening in Africa, and again, I cannot keep up with Africa. The reserves in Africa are nowhere near the size of anything else, but you can get them into an American gas tank in 2 weeks. Nigeria, founding member of OPEC. We've just sponsored coups in Sao Tome and Principe, one in Central African Republic. The French are moving on Côte d'Ivoire. The US is now building permanent military bases in the Gulf of Guinea and here in Liberia. Remember Liberia last year, a few years ago? And this is where the oil and exploration is. Now here, it's interesting, we've also tracked this at FTW, our breakouts of what I consider to be very likely man-made, bioengineered bioweapons. We've had outbreaks of the Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever in various places, and the Marburg virus in Angola, which has just taken more than 200 lives. I've spoken to a doctor who's seen it, and he just best described it as what you do is you sit back and you watch the patient melt right in front of you. So we're going to war all over the planet, and of course we're preparing for that all over the planet. Now, The Nation is not my favorite magazine, because right after 9/11, as I started telling these things, The Nation published stories saying that I was a mental case, fired from LAPD. David Korn wrote these stories, that I was making everything up, that I was a right-wing radical, that and now David Korn is writing much the same thing. Of course, David Korn gets his biggest paycheck from who? Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, okay? But now the Nation once in a while hits it right, and Catherine Austin Fitts and I have been talking about this for a long time with the Popsicle Index, but Naomi Klein has called it the rise of disaster capitalism. Let me sum that up for you with a brilliant cartoon. And so, while the end of the world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe that the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunities for profit. Hooray, we did it! As they kill human life on the planet. That's disaster capitalism, and that connects to the story Global Corp, which is on my website, which I encourage you to read. And basically, we are in the middle of this now. Uranium, everybody's going nuclear. Do you realize that Indonesia, a founding member of OPEC, is rushing to build nuclear plants? Why? Because Indonesia is going to become an oil importer within 5 years. That's how far they are into peak. Venezuela wants to build nukes, Australia wants to build nukes, Gambia wants to build nukes, South Africa wants to build nukes, Nigeria wants to build nukes. Everybody is rushing to build nuclear power plants. There ain't enough uranium to do it. And believe me, the number escapes me. I'm not going to make it up. But there is this enormous time period, something like 10 years, maybe more, before you get a return from a nuclear power plant on all the energy you burned to make it. And I love this conversation that I had in 2004 in Berlin at the Third Peak Oil Conference with Yves Cochet, who is a Green member of the French Parliament. And he's big on energy. And he was at one time the #2 in their energy ministry. And Yves said, you know, in France we get 75% of our power from nuclear. We have maybe 150 reactors around. You know, but every month a truck leaves each plant filled with plutonium waste. All it takes is one RPG hitting one truck and you have a dirty bomb killing 100,000 people. So every month we have maybe 100 dirty bombs driving around France. Wouldn't you like to have that driving around the US too? There are huge costs and risks with nuclear energy, but nuclear and coal is the way everybody is going because the way the money works doesn't offer them a chance to make profit any other way. And here's something else we're finding, which I caught pretty quickly, and Michael Caine, who writes for us, is a brilliant young guy. And not too long ago, some of you have probably heard that around the world, like there's this big explosion of interest in wind energy. Okay, again, for wind, you got to calculate the energy it takes to make the windmill. Those big blades are made out of plastic. That's oil. And you got to melt the steel, and you got to melt the generators and wind the copper wire, and then you get payback, okay? It's not free. There's no such thing as, there is no free lunch. First law of thermodynamics says energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It converts. The second law of thermodynamics says it only converts in one direction, from usable to unusable. That's called the law of entropy. Never changes. And there's always problems with efficiency along the way. Sure, a lot of people are rushing to wind, and with good reason. My dad lived out near Palm Springs. There's a huge wind farm out near Palm Springs. You might know in California there's a huge wind farm near the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, Berkeley, and the wealthy areas. And so then I saw this story that the state of Massachusetts was going to use Massachusetts tax dollars to build a huge wind farm. Where? On Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard, that's where the Kennedys lived, the Clintons lived, millionaires, billionaires. Because there's a law about electrical transmission. It gets used always by those closest to the source. And we're starting to see a pattern, so help me God, and I'm going to track this down until they kill me or whatever, or until I win or until whatever, because it seems that they're calling on the public tax base to build wind farms for the rich communities only. Isn't that enough to make you angry? Now, of course, there are people up in Eugene who call Ashland the rich community. I don't know. Of course, it also depends upon where wind is available. But the problem is, and I will ultimately insist that all of what we're going through now is nothing more than a spiritual crisis of the highest order. I believe the God and the universe are saying to the human race, either evolve or perish. We don't care. The universe doesn't care. Life's going to go on. The human race may not, and we may not deserve to. We will be the sole deciders what parts of us are worthy of inclusion in a spiritual universe that respects all life everywhere. But anyway, that's an interesting development about renewables, and there's kind of, that pretty much sums things up, doesn't it? Yeah? There's those elephants again. Okay, is China the end game? We wrote about this 3 years ago. Now, U.S. significantly raises China's oil demand outlook. This and one other study I read. Now, everybody understands exponential growth, like compound interest, right? It's dangerous. China's current economic growth rate is between 7% and 8%. Okay, which means that the 7% it grows next year is on top of the 7% this year, and the growth curve goes like this. By the year 2035, if China's growth rate doesn't change, there will be 700 million internal combustion-powered vehicles in China. Now, how do you think that's going to be for the ozone layer? Of course, there's not enough oil to power that. The U.S. just upped China's estimated oil consumption by 33% for this year alone. But China's having enormous problems. They're already having blackouts. They're already having, China warns of more power cuts throughout major regions in China, especially the industrialized regions in China, Shanghai and the major cities along the coast. They're having blackouts that are shutting down the Toyota plants and the GM plants and the Hyundai plants and the plant plants and all that stuff. So China is already in the midst of horrible blackouts. They're having horrible coal shortages, and the Chinese ecology is absolutely, because they have no environmental protection in China. The air pollution is horrible. The water is incredibly polluted. China is caught in its own no-win situation. But China is, of course, very aware of peak oil. But I love Chinese diplomacy. Here you see a great picture of the Chinese, the leader of the Chinese parliament, like the speaker of their house, there with Hugo Chavez. Now, you know that the U.S., is, especially the Bush administration, is not particularly fond of President Hugo Chavez of Venezuela. Yes, we sponsored a couple of coups, and he beat them both, you know. Chavez is, in his sleep, is 100 times smarter than George Bush. But there's another problem with Hugo Chavez. He's brown. He's actually part black, too. And this is where the world is really starting to get interesting, because there is a strong racist component to all of this. Is there anybody non-white in the room? Anywhere? Yay, thank you. Are you Native American? Hispanic? Bienvenidos, amigo, good. The problem is that Hugo Chavez is Latin and part black. And Western hegemony, especially the U.S. imperial brand name is what it's all about, a brand name. They couldn't tolerate Jean-Bertrand Aristide being a successful leader of Haiti, so they had to get rid of him. But Hugo Chavez is successfully uniting almost all of Latin America. And they're all falling in line behind him. The Lilliputians are not only getting mad, they're getting organized. The Chinese miracle is going to end soon. China has, and we're going to come back to Hugo in a second. Der Spiegel and other great economic publications have written heavily about China's flooded with really bad bank loans, really bad debt. They have their own bubbles that are ready to collapse. But you see all these guys knowing that peak oil is coming, they don't have to worry about it. They're just milking the system and tweaking it as long as they possibly can. That's how they're keeping the U.S. economy afloat. You know, most of the U.S. money has gone overseas, and foreign central banks are dumping U.S. dollar holdings like crazy, when the dollar has been the foreign currency reserve of choice by mandate, really, since the Bretton Woods agreements in the 1950s. But it turns out that all these banks in the Caribbean are buying all the Treasury bills now, and that's money that some of it's been stolen out of the U.S. Treasury. We've documented $5 trillion stolen out of the U.S. Treasury. That's your tax money. They're just using that to prop it up until it collapses, because the funny thing about a fire is that it destroys the bookkeeping records, doesn't it? But China now has invested $200 billion in cash in Iran. How many people think the U.S. is actually going to invade Iran? How many people think the U.S. may engage in airstrikes against their nuclear facilities? That's possible. The United States can't, maybe they are that stupid, but I'll tell you one thing. If the U.S. does invade Iran, the world ends. Why? There's no elasticity anywhere. Japan can't live without Iranian oil. India can't live without Iranian oil. Malaysia, Singapore can't live without Iranian oil. Brazil can't live without Iranian oil. Western Europe can't live without Iranian oil. We've had no more oil coming out of Iraq since we invaded Iraq, have we? Peak of Iraqi oil production was 3.5 million barrels a day in 1990. We've barely touched 2 million barrels a day since the invasion, since we occupied the country in 2003. And of course, there's been enormous sabotage to the infrastructure. There's one pipeline that the FARC guerrillas in Colombia have blown up so many times, the Cano Limon pipeline. They call it the flute. But the Iraqi infrastructure in certain parts of the company, they're calling a symphony of flutes. Okay, so the point is that nobody in their right mind believes that a U.S. invasion of Iran is going to increase Iranian oil production. Iran is not Iraq. They are 10, 15, 20 times better organized, better equipped, better trained. And Russia and China are pouring military technology in there. China just poured $200 billion in cash. India has committed $60 billion to invest in Iraq. Venezuela's doing deals. Brazil's doing deals. France and Germany and Russia are pouring money into Iran. Excuse me. They won't let the United States invade Iran because they will consider that to be tantamount to an invasion and an attack upon them. And they will respond immediately. Immediately. The world can't and won't do without Iranian oil right now. And Iran knows it. Now let's look at this little geography here pretty quickly. Okay? Here's Iran supplying all these countries here and Western Europe. Iraq's up here. This right here is the Straits of Hormuz. This is China. China right now gets all of it. China, Japan, and Korea, and Indonesia, or excuse me, Malaysia and the Philippines get all of their oil through right here, the Straits of Malacca. At its widest point, I think it's about 2 miles wide. 40% of the world's piracy occurs right here. Serious. Okay, the U.S. Navy is undergoing, Pacific Command is undergoing a massive expansion in here, getting ready to fight China. And we're going to come back to some of this geography. But here's the oil. Now here is what's called, this is the Caspian Sea. These states that border it are called the littoral, L-I-T-T-O-R-A-L states, because they border the coastline. The Caspian reserves are here. Now there was once great hope for the Caspian reserves. Ha, ha, ha. ExxonMobil and all the companies drilling there were telling you there might have been 350 billion barrels. Then by the early 90s, it became 250 billion barrels. Then now, literally, there's no more than 40 billion barrels of recoverable oil here. Billion barrels used every 11 days. China is building a pipeline to get in here. That's a hugely expensive undertaking, but that's how desperate they are. We have just opened, we, the West, the United States, has opened the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, which goes out to the Black Sea. That may pump, I don't know, I think it's 1.5 million barrels a day, or a million barrels a day out here. But again, 40 billion barrels, you can do the math. And this oil here is so heavy and so sour, there's so much sulfur in the oil, that you can see the mountains of sulfur from the Kashagan field next to the refineries from the space station with the naked eye. This planet is desperate for oil. So China's going to build a pipeline there. There was a big debate for a long time, and I watched this very closely. The Russians were going to build one pipeline from Siberia, either out here to their western coast near Sakhalin, where it could sell to Japan, the Philippines, or it was going to build a pipeline straight to China. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. This is another place where we absolutely got it right. I wrote this story that you see behind me on January 5th, 2005, because right before New Year's, Russia announced that the bidding war and the competition was over. They were going to build a pipeline to service Japan. And it just didn't ring right. I just didn't believe it was right. So on January the 5th, I wrote, no, there's something else moving under the carpet here. Now, I have a very good friend, the Honorable Cynthia McKinney, Congresswoman from Georgia, God bless her, who is, we put her back, all of us around the country who supported her, put her back in the House of Representatives. And we always use that term when there's something fishy going on. We just go, there's something moving under the carpet here. That was hinted at by Japan's reluctance to celebrate until Putin hit them with his investment demands. Now, Putin said, okay, we'll build a pipeline to Japan, but the Japanese are going to have to fund like half or more of the pipeline. And I wrote, this is far from over. China's far from out of the game. I would not put it past Putin to use it to buy time with the U.S., Japan's our buddy, while laying the seeds for a collapse of talks and construction down the road. Say when the pipeline is built to the geographic point where it must either turn south or continue east. That's maybe 2-3 years away, and in the meantime, Putin's options remain open. Wouldn't it be nice to have Japan pay for that segment of the pipeline? China would love that. This is the end game of games. There are no rules. January 5th, and this just hit. This just hit from, this is last week. That's, the date's off of here, but I mean, it was just within the week before I drove up to start this little tour in Oregon. China to get oil before Japan. Russia changed it. They said, no, we're going to send it to Japan. I called that one right on the head. Right on the head. Why? Everything, as peak oil unfolds, will be determined by geography. There is no trump card, political, economic, anything else for geography, anywhere. Isn't it funny that a guy named George Orwell described in his book, The 1984, a world that had evolved exactly that way? I wonder how he knew so much. Did you know that George Orwell was also MI5, British domestic intelligence, and he also worked for the BBC? Interesting, but Orwell had it right. So, yes, Japan's out, and now does everybody remember these recent spats between China and Japan? And CNN and everybody said, oh, it's over these textbooks in World War II war crimes. Bullshit. China and Japan are... China just passed Japan as the second largest importer of oil on the planet 2 years ago. Remember, we're playing a game of oil musical chairs. And the question now is who eats and who doesn't, who lives and who doesn't. So what China was saying, we got 1.3 billion people, Japan. You got your Toyota plants and your Honda plants here, your Kawasaki plants here. You want to see what we can do with our people? You want to see how mad we can get at you? And it was a direct slap at Prime Minister Koizumi. The stories are really bad. China mobs on rampage against the Japanese. And I caught it, but here's something else that I caught. And this is the real issue. In 1998, China passed the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf Act. And there's a copy of it. In that act, China claimed all exclusive control of all the mineral rights out to the edge of the Asian continental shelf. Here's why that's a problem. The Asian continental shelf goes out and includes Japan, which means Japan has no mineral rights, or Korea, in any of this area. And just last December, a Chinese nuclear sub was chased out of Japanese territorial waters right here. Japan is debating dropping its pacifist constitution and going military. And I guarantee you that Japan, in about, I don't know, a week, a month, can be a nuclear power. They may not have assembled the bomb, but they got everything they need to have one operational and working, probably miniaturized, very soon. Okay? So China's claiming all of this. Now, what I see happening, and what people like my dear friend Richard Heinberg, get my book, but also get Richard Heinberg's books, The Party's Over and Power Down. You can buy them from my website. We have a great store on the website. We're both with the same publisher. Richard Heinberg is brilliant. And he and I see things evolving exactly the same way. But geography will determine everything. The U.S. ultimately will abandon Korea. It has no choice against China. Japan will have to fold into the Chinese sphere of influence, and that will be bloody. Any of these things could trigger a nuclear war. All of this will have to fold into China's regional hegemony. China reevaluation would hit the bonds and not the dollar. China moves fast to claim oil sands, and this is more documentation on China moving into Alberta and Canada to claim Canada's stuff. We've been covering that pretty thoroughly. China is also facing, of course, severe water shortages, and those of you who are following what we're doing to Mother Earth understand that water is almost as critical as oil right now. 6.5 billion people on the way to 9. Too much for Mother Earth. This was a great story in Asia Times, and Asia Times has been doing some of the most clear, cogent, wonderfully hard-hitting and very incisive reporting of any paper on the planet over the course of the last 2 years. The Asia Times does wonderful work. They have a great English website. And basically, Jim Loeb is known around the world. But, you know, listen, we're just using everything faster than we possibly can. But in the meantime, the Atlantic Monthly has just published a story by Robert D. Kaplan, who is like Mr. Insider. Written 9 books on foreign policy and military affairs. He's trilateral, CFR. And basically he lays out the whole escalation of conflict with China and how he expects it to unfold. And this is all part of U.S. military war planning even now. So this is all being discussed. U.S. is already beefing up military units in the Pacific. Pacific Command will be the next major hot area of conflict, unless we go to war in Africa or Venezuela, you know, or Colombia or Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan or anyway, a lot of places. China and Russia are holding their first ever war games. The world don't like Uncle Sam. And Hugo Chavez again. I have loved Hugo Chavez actually for a long time. Starting about 2.5 years ago, I clipped this one story from Reuters, and I showed it in probably the next 10 or 15 lectures in a row. And the headline on the Reuters story said, "Chavez calls Bush asshole." And I said, I just had to put that. But Hugo Chavez is emerging as a true Bolivarian leader. He is galvanizing all of South America. He and President Lula of Brazil are forming very strong economic alliances, and together they're offering deals to Argentina and Chile and Bolivia and Peru, and they're all starting to come together, realizing that they really can stand separate from the U.S. And South America has been really a Rockefeller proprietary corporation for most of its existence. But there is one little problem about Latin America. There is another country which has, and I love this country. I visit this country many times a year. I have many friends from Mexico. And Mexico is in North America. It's part of the North American Free Trade Agreement, and since we had something called NORTHCOM take effect 2 years ago, its military is under the command of an American 4-star general, as is Canada's. So Mexico is going to have an enormous identity crisis as the world unfolds. And I don't know how that's going to play out for Mexico. It will have to decide whether it's an American colony or whether it is truly a Latin American country. But I got a feeling that if Hugo Chavez stays alive, and there's a big trump card coming up here that Chavez is playing, and if he is successful, that might even prompt a civil war in Mexico. So again, we're in that critical stage right now. But Latin America is clearly pulling away from the U.S. Now here's why Chavez has brilliant. How many people have heard any stories recently about a guy named Luis Posada Carillas? Luis Posada Carillas is one of the worst CIA butcher, assassin, murderer, torturers who ever set foot, and I've met a couple of them in my life, unfortunately. In 1976, he blew up a Cuban airliner flying from Caracas to Havana. Well, I think it had 176 or 200 people on board, men, women, children, just blew it up, killed all of them. Working for the CIA. By the way, here's your 5-point bonus question. Who was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1976? George Herbert Walker Bush, Poppy Bush. That was also the year the CIA tried to recruit me into protecting drug shipments. I'm not taking it personal. Posada Carillas escaped from a Venezuelan prison, in 1985 to become an active player also in the Iran-Contra scandal and death squads throughout Central and Latin America. He's a torturer, he's a butcher, and recently, in his old age, he's been running around Miami boasting about what a great friend he is of the American government when he is actually, no doubt about it, a fugitive, internationally known fugitive from Venezuelan prison, convicted murderer. And the international community just said, wait a minute, we want him extradited. We want to bring him back. We're going to the UN. Clearly, the US cannot refuse to extradite Posada. They cannot refuse to do that. Why? Because then the war on terror is exposed as a sham. Terror is about blowing up airliners, isn't it? This guy blew up an airliner for the US government. If we don't send him back for justice, how can we demand that any other country send us their so-called terrorists for trial here? But if we do send him back, and I noticed right away, legally the first jurisdiction would be Cuba. Fidel said, I don't need him here. You can just send him down to Hugo, you know? He didn't want to create too big a scene because I guarantee you that if they put Posada on trial, and I know this personally, they're going to expose all the links to CIA and the Bush family and everything else at his trial. So Chavez, forgive me if I offend any of the ladies here, but Chavez has one in this hand and the other in this hand. And there's no place for Uncle Sam to go. He's got them both in his hands right now. So this is one of the most enormous public relations coups I've ever seen in my life. And Chavez has just said, I'm going to break economic ties. I'll close the embassies, the consulate. I'll withdraw my people. All of Latin America will stand behind Hugo Chavez on this. All of Latin America. Why? Because Posada is a Latino who killed Latinos on the payroll of the gringos. And the Latinos are just about to say, basta, 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 bastamente, basta, basta, enough. Because they're seeing that Gulliver is getting a little weak. I've written tons about Colombia, and Colombia is being used as a proxy. You know that 60% of our heroin, and of course all the world's cocaine, comes from Colombia. You should know that a whole bunch of U.S. Army Special Forces troops and other military personnel, 7 Special Forces group literally runs Colombia right now. And a whole bunch of our military personnel just got caught smuggling cocaine out of Colombia on military flights. When I've been writing about that, that's really how I got my come up on the streets. Many of you know, who followed me know that I had a face-to-face confrontation with CIA Director John Deutsch in South Central Los Angeles in 1996, and I made him look like a bumbling idiot. That's on my DVD, The Truth and Lies of 9/11, and that's over CIA and drugs. But Big Oil is turning up the heat, trying to start a proxy war between Colombia and Venezuela. And Russia and China are going to Chavez and saying, you want bombs, you want planes, you want guns, man, you can have whatever you want, you know? And so things are getting really spicy right now. And not only that, contrary to this country, or in case you haven't noticed, there's a slight recruitment problem in the U.S. military. You know, the U.S. Army just got caught they had signed up a guy who was a certified hospitalized manic depressive to put him in the infantry. I have seen unmedicated manic depressives. I don't want that guy to have a machine gun when he goes one way or the other. I mean, they're putting criminals in the service. Okay, but on the other hand, in Venezuela, the population is rushing to volunteer to join militias to defend the country in the event of a U.S. coup or invasion. Whew. I mean, that's a powerful statement. Oh, there's more of those elephants running at us again. As the world burns, you got to go to my site and read that. Forbes, the world on the brink of ruin. I mean, you know, hey, listen, Steve Gates, Warren Buffett, you know, all those guys have moved their money out of the country. Bill Gates, excuse me. Steve Gates is a retired LAPD captain who I confuse a lot because I knew that putz. I don't know Bill Gates. But now the foreign central banks are dumping U.S. dollar assets, and that is really significant. It's been the dollar has been the reserve currency for the entire planet for, again, 50 years plus. Oil's been priced in dollars, although people are starting to price it in euros. And you know what Iran's biggest crime is? They're opening an oil bourse, trading in oil futures priced in euros this year. Yeah, but now it's been documented that quietly over the past 2 years, China and India have dumped 13% of their dollar holdings. And it's like a run on the bank. They can't dump them all at once because, you know, the value will tank. They want to sell while they're high and, you know, factor their way out of it. So it's like a game before everything collapses, but it's coming. This is the U.S. current account deficit. The foreign trade deficit may hit $900 billion next year. Again, this is the shares of the company being worth, you know, 1/10 of what the company owes. That's the United States. Somebody's going to foreclose really soon. And the United States government is actually going to help people foreclose on us. GM Ford bonds cut to junk status. Warren Buffett is a prophet of doom. And here's that other thing here. Remember, I told you the money's moving out of the country. If your portfolio is stuck with losers, you might want to add more international stocks. And of course, this is all phrased to keep you pouring your money into the stock markets, because in the history of bubbles, who always gets burned? The people who buy in at the last. How many people in here have a pension fund? You're not going to admit it? Or what, you're all independently wealthy? Okay. What? Yeah. Yeah, because if you go look at the portfolios of your pension funds, you'll find they're all in mutual funds and stocks. Federal employees? Yeah. Well, it depends. Yeah. Oh, wait till I hit you with the real goodie about Social Security. Okay? Here's my suggestion. Now, Ashland real estate looks to be holding good, but a bubble, again, is not an isolated system. As credit collapses, as lending institution collapses, you know that the legislation has been introduced to put Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two largest lending institutions in the country, into receivership for $900 billion worth of fraud. And they're trading mortgage-backed securities as hedge funds to pop up stock funds to pop up your pension funds. No, whatever happens with real estate in one specific area is not going to, the bubble is the housing bubble is a global bubble. From the Sydney Morning Herald, full speed to another Asian meltdown, that's starting. I hope I have, yes, here's the slide. This is from The Economist, also one of the most respected financial and economic magazines. The global housing market, it's already popping in Australia, it's popping in Japan, it's popping in England. And that spreads because the big lenders hedge their money and move the funds around to service everybody else to keep it going. It's coming here really, really fast. I was in London, and a friend of mine got me a free apartment because a friend of his in this wonderful neighborhood called Belsize Park, which is a very upscale part of London, has had his two-bedroom. The second bedroom was the size of a closet. And I'm sorry, my apartment in Sherman Oaks that I paid $900 a month for is bigger than this place. In central London, this thing was on the market for £280,000. Pound is like it's like $2 to a pound. So they're asking like a half. Of course, The price has come down 5 times and no offers. In Philadelphia County, I didn't have time to make this. The day before I left to drive up here, which was, I don't know when that was last Saturday when I drove up for our first stop in Eugene, then Portland. I clipped a story that in the county around Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there are 1,000 foreclosures a month. That's because so many people have mortgaged their homes to 125% to buy a second home for investment, and they can't make the payments on the first. And the lending standards are going through the roof. But this is, through the drain, down the drain. And this is a speculative bubble of the most enormous proportions. And for a long time, foreclosure rates have been higher than during the Great Depression. It's not a bubble till it bursts. Well, that's great news from the LA Times. Running out of bubbles, Paul Krugman of the New York. Paul Krugman actually writes some very good, insightful, caring stuff from time to time. He really does. And he's saying, remember and basically what he says is, you fools, you fools. How many people own your own homes? Outright. Outright. Okay, that's good. God bless you. Don't sell unless you're planning on that being your savings, or we'll talk about some of those options in a minute. How many people have, if you were to contrast equity versus unpaid principal, how many of you have less than 20% equity in your home at current market value? You're in trouble. 30, 40%. Because if the housing values collapse, you could easily wind up upside down. You know what that means, don't you? You owe more than it's worth. That may or may not happen. Ashland is there are certain unique communities, but bear in mind, if the whole economic system goes down and pension funds go down, et cetera, you may be in trouble. I encourage you to evaluate your own situation personally. Lending standards plumb new depths. They are lending money, no money down loans, 125% to people who wouldn't have qualified 10 years ago to buy a car. That's to keep it up. CBS Market Watch also does pretty good work. This is just talking about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are getting ready to be foreclosed, that Congress is seeking the authority to close them. And Krugman describes this clearly. And this is how it fits in with peak oil. Over the course of the last 6 months, I have seen a completely new term creep into the lexicon around peak oil. And it just came out of the blue. It's called demand destruction. How do you destroy demand for oil? No. You collapse the economy. People who are out of work, unemployed, and starving don't drive cars, they don't take vacations, they don't borrow money, they don't buy second cars, they don't fly on airplanes. Demand destruction. And this term is coming out of the Council on Foreign Relations, it's coming out of the trilaterals, it's coming out of some of the big powerhouses up here, because one of the ways to mitigate the effects of peak oil is to destroy demand. And so Paul Krugman tells us that what we're looking at now is the debt peonage society. How many people know that just for the second time in 5 years, the bankruptcy laws have just been rewritten again? And how many people know that under the new bankruptcy laws, most people will not be able to liquidate their debts, but literally the corporations that you owe money to, your credit card companies or your lenders, will be able to determine where you move, where you live, and how much money you get to live on until the debt is discharged. Indentured servitude. And yet, what do they put out to you every day? Buy, consume, breed, buy, consume, breed, more, buy, credit, easy, buy, get, go, taste, spend more, do more. Demand destruction. People on the so-called right wing have been worried about concentration camps, and that's nonsense. I've been hearing about concentration camps. I would probably get to go to a concentration camp. You know, Gino might get to go to a concentration camp with me, I don't know. But most of you won't, because concentration camps are expensive. They cost money. Yeah, you gotta have the guards, and besides that, it's all taxpayer money, and if the government's broke anymore, well, you're not going to be spending that money. It's much better to have an unemployed migrant workforce starving to death that's fluid, that will go anywhere and work for slave wages wherever they're needed. They'll transport themselves. They'll walk, they'll crawl, they'll die along the way, and if a few more of them die, that's less oil to use. I don't think this way. Henry Kissinger and George Bush and Dick Cheney think this way. The financial endgame, this is a great story, and when I get back to LA after I take a couple of days off, I'm going to put this up. This really describes how, I love this quote, capitalism requires people to be quiet souls in the workplace and wild pagans at the cash register. Yeah, the sudden systemic implosion which will usher in the brave new world. It is not far away. It is not far away. And I love this. The U.S. is under such heat and the dollar is collapsing so fast and the U.S. economy has lost it that all the drug dealers in the world are now switching to euros. Think about it. I used to be a narc. No, I've seen the pictures. You know, down in Colombia with the Medellin cartel, they didn't used to count $100 bills. They used to weigh them. They had so many they couldn't count them. They weighed them and they would shrink wrap them on pallets, you know, the pallets that you lift with forklifts, and bury them. Now, the euro's been as high as 134. Now, the U.S. government has artificially suppressed that. They bombed the markets, and I may not have time to deal with that right now. But the euro's been as high as 134 to $1. So if you're smuggling currency, it obviously makes more sense to smuggle euros than dollars, especially since they now have a 200-euro note. So the drug dealers, who generate $600 billion a year in illegal profits, most of which they try to launder, the CIA wants laundered through Wall Street, are switching to euros. And that's $600 billion a year. And I've lectured, one of my best lectures ever, I don't have the tape here, but it's called Wall Street's War for Drug Money, which was a lecture I gave at the University of Southern California in December of 2000. Describes how that works. So that's 600, you know, a lot of that money being laundered through Wall Street. Let me just stop for 1 second and do this, because you guys appear to be very financially savvy. How many people know what a price-to-earnings ratio is? Right. Yes. I'm moving to Ashland. Okay. Price-to-earnings ratio. For those of you who don't know, it's market cap divided by net profits. Market cap, $30 million or $300 million for a company. The total value of shares, $300 million. Divided by a net profit of $10 million, 30 to 1. 30 to 1. Price, that's not an uncommon P to E on the market. Enron's was 60 to 1. Basically what that says, and it doesn't happen automatically, but for every dollar of net profit you create $30 in stock value, or $60 in stock value. So what happens is the analysts look at the stock. If your net profits are up, they look at the stock and they put out a strong buy. It appears to be undervalued, and you buy the stock and the price value goes up. So if I'm Enron, which had 700 subsidiaries in the Cayman Islands, I got news for you, there's no oil and gas in the Cayman Islands. There's drug money in the Cayman Islands. Sneaks money onto their net profits, or if AIG, with a price to earnings, I think theirs was about 22 the last time I checked, or something like that. Every dollar they sneak onto net profits of drug money creates $22, $30, $60 in stock value. How do all the executives at the top get paid? In stock. At the top of the bubble, they sell the stock, they cash out, they run away with your money, the bubble pops, your pension fund, which is invested in Enron, or any of these companies, goes, and Ken Lay is off. Where is Ken Lay? He's having a good old time. Lawmakers scramble to save bases. Have you seen this about all the closures of military bases? You want to talk about what that's going to do to the domestic economy? How many tens and hundreds of thousands of jobs downstream are going to go when they close down 35, 40, 50 bases? It's all coming. It's a perfect storm. Now, I am a great fan of gold, physical gold. The price of gold has been artificially suppressed. Gold has many benefits. But I should tell you that they bomb the gold price because they have ways. They have a thing called the plunge protection team. They have stolen money that they can flood the market. But I'm a strong believer in gold. But the bottom line is, in the essence of this article, and this is what Catherine Fitz talks about on her website, is the markets make absolutely no sense anymore if you look at them. You think something should be moving up, that should be moving down. They'll both move in the same direction. And that's because they're being manipulated to keep people, those still gullible enough, under the illusion that there's a reason to put their money in. And here it is. Senate defies Bush, approves highway bill. I mean, build more freeways. Sure, peak oil is coming. We won't have anything to power the cars with, but they're building more highways. That's just looting the Treasury, moving taxpayer dollars out to the corporate cronies so they can take that profit and move it offshore or whatever they're going to do, or wait until everything forecloses and come back and buy a few houses for 10, 20 cents on the dollar. There's those damn elephants again. Now, Social Security. What a great dog and pony show it has been for George Bush to be running around saying, you know, I need Congress to help me pass Social Security reform so that we can get your money into the private markets, right? Guess what? He can do it by executive order, and he probably will. Executive order. Chuck Grassley of Iowa put it out, and I've known this for a little bit, for a while too. We haven't had a constitution. We haven't been using it anyway. Then there's the draft. How many people in the room are between the ages of 18 and 35? How many people have family members in the room between the ages of 18 and 35, or children of that age? Guess what? It's coming. Women will not be exempt from the draft. And we've been calling this one for well more than a year. Now, the reason why they've gotten away with not imposing the draft this soon is because a form of backdoor draft, this is a brilliant piece. Stan Goff is such a brilliant writer. I love this guy. He writes so well I have to smoke a cigarette after I read one of his stories when he's really pissed off. But what they're using in the military now is what's called stop loss. Anybody heard of stop loss? Yeah. Anybody got some relatives in the Guard or the Reserve? You know, 55-year-old men called up for 6 months are now entering their third year of service in Iraq, their second and third years of service. Under current law, under current military enlistment law, the way the Supreme Court, of course, we don't really have a Supreme Court anymore, you know. Under current law, a guy going in at 18 thinking he's going in on a 2-year enlistment can actually be held on active duty until he's 55 years old. And he doesn't know it. He doesn't, or he or she doesn't know it. And they're holding the Guard and the reservists over, destroying their lives. How many veterans we got in the room? God bless all of you. God bless each and every one of you. They're holding over these guys. I mean, there's a Vietnam vet on active duty who stayed with the reserve in Iraq now. Yeah, there's actually several of them. They're all like E7s, E8s who just stayed in the reserve, you know, for a long time, and they got called up and they're back on active duty. I mean, how much blood can you suck? But remember, the whole world now is getting ready to fight us, and you really think we're going to invade Iran? We haven't got the military manpower to do that right now. But any one of these conflicts could break out, and I guarantee you the draft is coming, and here's a little bit more proof, is that the draft, a law that Charlie Rangel had put in and called back just before the 2004 election, he just reintroduced last week, calling for a draft. Now, from the wilderness, we've been doing research for a long time. I knew this was coming, contacting every country that we could get an answer out of, saying which countries will, asking which countries will extradite back to the U.S. and which won't. Canada, unfortunately, probably will. It's not like Vietnam. The Canadian people will risk their lives and risk going to jail to hide American citizens. But we now have this thing called smart borders, total information awareness. Everything's computerized, everything's chipped. If the draft comes in and it looks like there's an exodus, they'll shut down all 18 to 35-year-olds from leaving the country. They'll put them on a no-fly list. They can do it by computer in a heartbeat. There are 40-plus FBI offices scattered all around Canada. We own Canada. Now, New Guinea won't extradite. You go live with the headhunters and the cannibals. New Zealand won't, but how do you get into New Zealand? See, the other problem is you have to get into the country. Switzerland won't, Russia won't, Brazil will not. So, you know, we have been trying to, and we have this list on our site for subscribers, because this cost me a lot of money to do this research, and we're trying to upgrade it as much as possible, and we will when and as the law comes into effect. So we have to look, but here's proof. Canada just shipped back an AWOL guy to the U.S. Turned conscientious objector, said, I cannot go back and kill women and children. I cannot go back and fight for a war that had nothing to do with 9/11. And Canada just shipped him back. So don't try to send your son to Canada thinking he's going to have an easy go of it, your son or daughter. And then, of course, we have climate change. I'm really working on you now, aren't I? Okay, increase in dead zones. This is from Britain Independence. We're starving the world's seas. The dead zones are spreading everywhere. Britain faces big chill as ocean current slows. Now, this is kind of interesting. I realize I've gone a little bit long, but that's all right. Just last year, there was a big leak of a story, leak in quotes, from the Pentagon that they had a classified study that they released showing that climate change might cause the Gulf Stream to collapse because the global warming was melting the ice cap, the cold water's coming off the pole, and it was, of course, the cold water will drive the warm water of the Gulf Stream underneath it, which would plunge Britain, it could plunge Europe, excuse me, into an ice age over the course of a year, 2 years. Fresh water, thank you. Salinity, specific gravity density, thank you. Not temperature, you're right. But it would sink the Gulf Stream and plunge Europe into an ice age. Well, guess what? It's already chilling right now. That's why people in Britain are really concerned about peak oil, and the ones who are awake, and concerned about the climate. San Francisco Guardian put it late, it's much too late to sweat global warming. It's time to prepare for the inevitable. It's here. We can't reverse it. And that's based on scientific studies. 2/3 of the world's resources used up, from the Guardian in Britain. The good news is that the Republicans and the oil companies have said it will be much easier to drill for oil in the North Pole if we melt the ice caps. I told you I was going to give you good news. What's the matter? Jeez. Now, I did not make this chart, and I will get back home and I'll find out. This was from Comcast.net. I don't know who did it, but there's actually 50, and we broke early stories on this, very detailed stories, that since September the 11th, 50 leading, world-class microbiologists specializing in gene sequencing and DNA, the things you need to do to make a gene-specific bioweapon, have died under very mysterious circumstances. An actuary would just go berserk looking at the stats here. And deaths by mugging, struck by car. There's one, amazingly stupid stories. Joseph Wiley of Harvard he was Nobel class, and the official story of his death, he was into gene sequencing and DNA splicing and stuff like that, was that he was driving from a party in Memphis, the bridge from Memphis over into Arkansas, stopped on the bridge over the Mississippi River where there's no place to park, got out of his car. He'd only had one prior epileptic seizure in his life, like 30 years ago, but while he got out of his car in a place where there's no place to park, he had an epileptic seizure at the same time as an 18-wheel truck, heavy, came along, bounced the bridge, and a gust of wind picked him up and blew him off the bridge. That's the official cause of death. Professor Ian Langford in Great Britain, who had done research on bioweapons, the newspaper story said he was caught while he was jogging in between two cars having a traffic accident. Absolutely bizarre. Now, what I have speculated about this is that we've actually done a lot of work on this, and I'd like to get back to it a lot more. We have to grow FTW, and I've got to get more infrastructure, and that's one of the reasons I want to move up here, too, is just to, the government's been working on this pretty hard lately, but I need more infrastructure to research this, is that we know that three countries, it's a matter of record, 3 countries in the world are known to have pursued gene-specific bioweapons. Whether the gene that they're seeking out is something, a proclivity to Alzheimer's or diabetes or race or hair color or eye color, whatever, we don't know. Those 3 countries are South Africa, Israel, and the United States. And I've developed some good information, and we've sourced this on our website, that research has moved along quite a bit. And so when I see stories like this, Marburg Virus death toll hits 180, especially in regions of Africa, and you know that the money elites just think that people in Africa are just useless eaters. But then we see bird flu, 20% of the globe may be hit. You remember SARS? You remember the West Nile virus? Genetic weapons could be introduced by any of those means and methods. So I and many others who look at this have really thought and suspected that perhaps that is on the agenda as a tool of population reduction. I don't know. So we go back to this world energy picture and we look at a world that's blowing up, and we really see a world that has gone mad. This is just a little bit out of order, but China accepts defeat on the EU vote. Now this is perhaps, we started with this. Remember when you walked in and sat down? Now look at this. This is from the National Geographic. I don't know how they did it. They got satellite images and they did whatever the National Geographic does in their own beautifully wonderful artistic way. This is the world at night, but this is a perfect representation of energy use around the world, isn't it? But notice some interesting things down here. India is perfectly outlined, almost, isn't it? Pakistan isn't, okay? There's Japan, right there. See, China is all around here. This is what's exploding. Europe is very easy to distinguish. South Africa, right here. Brazil, Venezuela. Look at this. You can see the I-5 corridor. You can see the I-5 corridor. Now, I have said clearly, and this would also then take in the use of fertilizers, natural gas, and everything else that energy is used for. It's the perfect metaphor. As I lecture around the world and then around the country, I say, look, people say, where should we go? I said, if I was making a choice for me, I have 4 criteria: low population density, access to fresh water, arable land, and access to timber. I'm moving to Ashland, okay? No. Wait a minute. They're all going to figure it out. And I'm not telling everybody because I don't want this to hit the press. But look at this. This is the Pacific Northwest outside of the I-5 corridor right here. Very low population density. And thank God there's very few military bases in the state of Oregon. I love Oregon. Love Oregon. Love Oregon. Okay. Yeah, it's wonderful. But you see, most people are thinking, I'll move to Costa Rica. There are also other places that qualify up here in the northern Midwest. There's places in Kentucky and Tennessee that are good. There's some places through here that are all right. But the problem is, I think you see what the problem is. 6.5 billion people can't move to Costa Rica and sleep on the beach. But as you look at this and as you look at peak oil, think of one other thing. If you were falling to the gutter, would you rather fall from the penthouse or from the sidewalk? The areas of the world that will be hurt least by peak oil are wherever you see darkness. Of course, up there it's pretty damn cold, but you can pretty much see that wherever it's poorest and there's any kind of sustainable living, those are the areas that will be least affected by peak oil. Wherever the lights are brightest, those are the ones that are going to have the greatest effect. All things being equal, but we are not in a ceteris paribus situation. We are in a situation where there's a massive fight on and a struggle to secure the resources to play musical chairs to kill somebody else. It is literally people standing on drowning people's shoulders to keep their heads up in a flood. Government wiretaps and searches are up 75%. Now they're proposing that the FBI doesn't even need to get a subpoena to get any of your personal records at all. They just can write it up and type it up themselves and walk in and hand it to you. No judge required. We used to have a constitution. Evidence from torture is usable in court. Isn't that nice? We used to have a constitution, didn't we? Democrats have been voted out of Baptist churches. There's one of those elephants again. Most evil statement I have ever heard. We will never stop craving more. Say 2 authors. Say Huber and Mills. We will never stop craving more, nor should we ever wish to. Energy is what brings light out of dark, civilization out of disorder, prosperity out of poverty. Detroit News editorial by Thomas Bray, February 22nd. 27, 2005. Their new book's title is The Bottomless Well, The Twilight of Fuel, The Virtue of Waste, and Why We Will Never Run Out of Energy. Arbeit macht frei. Arbeit macht frei. Everybody know what that is? Arbeit macht frei is the slogan that was above the gates of Auschwitz. Work will make you free. So crossing the Rubicon is a map. It's a map of this world in which we live. And now I'm going to come back briefly before I shut up, take a break, and talk about 9/11, because I have shown, yeah, the global race is on to snag oil supplies. And I've written this book as a prosecutor, as a legal case. I would take this case to trial right now. It would be admissible in a court of law according to evidentiary standards, and I believe I could secure a conviction in a rational court. In order to prove a case of mass murder, charging Richard Cheney, George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Henry Kissinger, General Richard Myers, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and a whole bunch of other people with premeditated mass murder on September 11th, you have to show three things: means, motive, and opportunity. The motive for 9/11, I think, is pretty clear. The world's running out of oil. And I have shown in this book from documentary evidence that Dick Cheney and the U.S. government was aware of peak oil a long time before 2001. Does anybody remember Dick Cheney's secret energy task force that concluded in May of 2001? Okay, let's look at a quick quote from that. Oops, we'll get back in a second. From that report, May 2001, America in the year 2001 faces the most serious energy shortage since the oil embargoes of the 1970s. Estimates indicate that over the next 30 years, U.S. oil consumption will increase by 33%, natural gas consumption by well over 50%, and demand for electricity will rise by 45%. U.S. energy consumption is expected to increase by about 32% by 2020. Between 2000 and 2020, U.S. natural gas demand is projected by the Energy Information Administration to increase by more than 50%. Yet we produce 39% less oil today than we did in 1970, the peak of production in the U.S., leaving us ever more reliant on foreign suppliers. On our present course, America 20 years from now will import nearly 2 of every 3 barrels of oil, a condition of increased dependency on foreign powers that do not always have America's best interests at heart. And we just see, and I have said in this book, and I say this in every lecture, that the deepest, darkest secrets of September 11th lie in the records of that task force, which was paid for by your money, which Dick Cheney and the Bush administration have refused to release, and they've just got the final Supreme Court decision. And when it was going to the Supreme Court last year, what happened? Dick Cheney takes Justice Antonin Scalia on a U.S. government White House aircraft with Secret Service protection on a duck hunting trip before Scalia renders the decision. That's called a conflict of interest. Scalia should have recused. I'm sorry? It is business as usual. Okay, so if we go back to this, and clearly in the book I show you other records that show you 7 pages that have emerged. But what I show you with the means, motive, and opportunity on 9/11, and the summation is on my website, is very clearly that the means was the fact that also in May and June of 2001, all war game exercise planning and preparation for terrorist attacks was placed under the direct control of the Vice President of the United States pursuant to White House executive order. It's on the White House website. Richard Cheney took control of all military war game exercises. And that on the day of September the 11th, we have now found 5. I only confirmed 4 in the book. I got another one since the book was published. 5 separate Air Force war game exercises, all taking place in the Northeast Air Defense Sector. That's Washington and New York, where the attacks occurred. And those 5 exercises, number 1, moved most of the fighter aircraft in the region to northern Canada and to Alaska to engage in a war game exercise for Soviet over-the-pole bombers. Wait a minute. Don't have that anymore. I'm having a coughing fit. Second, 22 false radar injects were placed on FAA and NORAD radar screens. I need some water. I think that's better. 22 false radar injects were placed on the radar screens of the FAA and the Northeast Air Defense Sector, confusing the air traffic controllers so they didn't know where to send the fighters. This happens when I get going too long. Also, I did original investigation. Thanks to... We're almost done. Let me rephrase that, Your Honor. I didn't say I'm almost done. If you, why don't you read that while I do this? I'll be back in a minute. That's an email from Major Don Arias of 1st Air Force at Tyndall Air Force Base. I copied the name of a war game exercise out of Richard Clark's book, Against All Enemies. He was the terrorism czar. And he said Vigilant Warrior. And I said, where'd that one come from? We had Vigilant Guardian, Northern Vigilance. And I knew, because my father was an Air Force pilot, or an Air Force aviator. He was a weapons officer and navigator, that all war game exercise names have meanings. So Richard Clark submitted in testimony that General Richard Myers had said, we're right in the middle of Vigilant Warrior. So I finally got this guy to go on the record. And if you read the bottom, he says, a field training exercise, if you're in the military, that means it's a war game, it's a real play exercise where you got planes flying. Bottom line, this was a written confirmation that on the day of September the 11th, the United States Air Force had airplanes up posing as hijacked airliners in the middle of the attacks on 9/11. The bottom line is there were only between 8 and 10 fighters left in the Northeast Air Defense Sector, and they all fly in pairs available to respond. The air traffic controllers had 22 possible hijackings on their screens, and they didn't know where to send the fighters. And Dick Cheney was running the whole thing from the basement of the White House, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the bunker, beneath the White House with the Secret Service, because under U.S. law, and I have everything footnoted, and I even quote their own records in the book, the Secret Service in a national security event is the superior, is the primary entity in the entire United States government, and it has completely redundant command and control systems over the Air Force, every part of the military, every part of the federal government, even the FAA. They have all the radars and radios and computers in the basement of the White House, all at Secret Service control. And that's how it was executed. That's how it was executed. There were Arabs on the planes. The muscle guys, I'm sure, were sacrificed. But 5 of the hijackers, thanks to Newsweek, so-called hijackers, had received training at military bases, and I don't think they were on the planes. I think the planes were flown by remote control, because none of them had an instrument rating, let alone the capacity to fly those planes. And yet I have documented that the technology to fly airliners by remote control with absolute precision, even land them, has been in existence for more than 20 years. And it's already installed on airplanes anyway. So that gave us the attack. That gave us the reason, because everybody went out. Now here's one last piece of joyous news about 9/11. There's no place left to take this, no court anywhere, no nothing. The 9/11 Commission, which was full of more conflicts of interest and liars and criminals and crooks than I could possibly imagine, actually fabricated evidence. I got copies of all the original timelines submitted by everybody right after the attacks. There were many conflicts, but when the final 9/11 report came out, if you look at the right-hand column, all of these times had not been submitted by any agency. That's like the prosecution and the defense submitting exhibits in a court trial, the judge going into chambers and coming out with a whole new set of evidence that neither side had ever introduced. Lying through their teeth. Did the 9/11 Commission talk about war games? Yeah, it mentioned one of them in a footnote of its report, and it even lied about that one. It mislabeled Vigilant Guardian as the Russian over-the-pole exercise, when in fact that was Northern Vigilance, and I have a copy of the NORAD website, North American Aerospace Defense Command website document that tells which is really what, and nobody would answer any questions about it. The generals went running out of the room. So 9/11 is gone. But now, when an American asks, I can't believe that my government would ever do anything, have I not created a situation where you can conceive of these bastards doing something like 9/11 to get what they wanted? And they got what they wanted, didn't they? A sequential war to control the last remaining oil reserves on the planet. I am going to leave you with some good news. That was my father. He served with the 91st Bombardment Group Heavy out of Bassingbourn Air Base, B-17s during the Second World War. Was shot down during the Battle of the Bulge. Crash landed 300, he was a gunner, crash landed 300 yards inside the Allied lines at Bastogne. Survived a second crash landing at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida in the 50s. We all have to start, the hardest thing, as the Buddha would say, is letting go. The thing would get us all is attachments. This was the last picture of my father taken alive before his stroke. It's my stepmother who has Alzheimer's. And Dad left me a 2003 Cadillac DeVille. Because that's the world he believed in. He thought that was the best thing he could do for his son. And I can't sell the car, it's part of a trust now anyway. So, you know, so the point is we all have been conditioned to hold things deeply and weave them into our consciousness about things we can and we can't do, things we can't think and we can think. Letting go of old ideas and old concepts now is critical because it means adaptability. And any ecologists know that adaptability is what determines species survival. Diversity is what determines a species survival. That's why I wish we had a lot more color in this room. I really mean that. I really mean that. But there is hope, and there really is hope. Remember the 5 rules. There is no combination of alternative energy sources anywhere that will enable current consumption and growth to continue. Even if there were, it takes 30 years and lots of capital investment to change an energy infrastructure. Peak oil is here now. No government entity, federal or state, will do or be able to do anything to solve peak oil and energy shortages. The political system is broken. Until you change the way money works, you change nothing. It will be more profitable to let decline, starvation, wars, disease, and famine occur than it will be to prevent them. Disaster capitalism. All real solutions will be place-based, local, and originate at the grassroots, independent of government. What saves you will be determined by what and who is in your own neighborhood and what kind of cooperation has been achieved there. Now here's some of the good news. An Australian Member of Parliament and the Deputy Prime Minister have gone on record about peak oil in Australia. That doesn't mean the Australian government's going to do anything. It means that they're warning the Australian people so that they can do something. In the United States of America, Congressman Roscoe Bartlett of Maryland, who I will meet with next month when I go to Washington for a family reunion, has also been on the floor of the House of Representatives twice during what's called special orders. That's when they have free time to talk, and had an hour each time with support from other members of Congress talking about peak oil, and this is spreading like wildfire across the internet. And what's really wonderful is that small towns all over the country, Vermont, Minnesota, Kentucky, here in Oregon, there's small towns are starting to have their own conferences on peak oil. What can we do locally? The town of Willits, California is almost completely off the grid already anyway. They are making these, they're taking over the town councils, they're taking over the local governments, they're saying, we're going to do this ourselves and we're doing this locally, and that's how it's going to be handled anyway. Everything is going to be place-based. You're not going to get your food from Idaho or Chile or any place else. It's going to come from here in the future society. So people are waking up and they are doing what needs to be done, and they're doing it outside of the paradigm. So I encourage you to get active locally here. Go to your town hall, go to your city council, go to Jackson County, go to wherever you got to go, and you start demanding that this get on the agenda. And then you start, don't wait for them. That's the one failure of progressives, I think. For 50, 60 years, progressives have sacrificed, they've worked hard, they have been poor, they have had demonstrations, they've worked and they've labored, and the world has only gotten worse. Am I right? Yeah. And there is a really bad misconception that I'm going to correct right before I shut up. And here's the really bad misconception. The misconception is if you're going to be a pure activist, you have to be poor. You can't charge. You have to give it away for free. Well, I was poor for 30 years. The CIA made me homeless and bankrupt, 25 years, and bankrupt. And you know what? I work better when my rent is paid. I work better when I sleep at night. I work better when I don't have to worry about where the next meal is coming. I have dedicated from the wilderness to doing that. I made a promise in Portland, it's on this tape, that every penny I got from subscriptions, from sales, I would put into giving more work to more activists and paying them more so that we could do more work. And I have kept that promise. I have. And this is where activists have got to learn to stop being duped by the Rockefellers and the Bushes and all these guys who want to say, you have to be poor. How could you charge? There must be something wrong with you. Well, how come you guys? Look at how they use money. They take care of their own. Why don't we take care of ours? All right, one of them, this is for all people who believe that activists and people wanting to change the world have to be poor. Catherine Austin Fitts teaches you actually how to make money and give it away. And I give it away. I feed the people that are on my side. But one of the most profound spiritual truths I have ever heard in my whole life is climb down off the cross, asshole, we need the lumber. That job's been taken. So in crossing the Rubicon, I have for you a map. And it is my firm desire, God willing, please, to get my company and my staff and me moved to Ashland as soon as we can get the money and whatever we have to do to get moved up here, because we can be effective here. But more importantly, this is a place I want to call home. I want to belong here because we can do things here that will save other lives. As I should, thank you. I had this great concluding line. It's gone. Look. Oh, here's what it is. Here's what it is. And I'll shut up with this. That's my new motto. Denial stops here. Denial is not a river in Egypt, by the way. Denial stops here. Okay? There is a reason why in an airplane, in an airliner, the flight attendant says, in the event of a sudden loss of pressure, an oxygen mask will appear before your face. Please put on your own oxygen mask before trying to help somebody else. This is where we can prototype, we can archetype, we can develop here and throughout the state of Oregon, the Pacific Northwest, the survival tools that people will need in a post-petroleum lifestyle so that we can share that knowledge with the rest of the world so that not everybody on the Titanic has to drown. And we're going to pass that knowledge only to the people who know that it's sinking, not the ones who are on their way back to the bar to have another drink. Okay, we save the ones who want to save, but we can save lives with the knowledge that we create. Thank you very much. Ten-minute break. Thank you. Thank you, Ashland. Thank you, Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. And thank you, SOU Media Collective. And thank all of you wonderful people. We'll move to questions and answers. And I'll see if I can answer your questions. Hi.
I wanted to ask you,
closer,
if David Ray Griffin and Alex Jones, have you talked to them, and is that how they got their information about 911?
Well, no. Two completely different, one's apples and one's oranges as far as I'm concerned. David Ray Griffin's books are excellent analyses of 9/11, which he got, I'm sure, some by reading my work, some by reading a lot of other people's works. Those who have read Crossing the Rubicon know that I pay homage to about 30 or 40 other magnificent researchers. I didn't do that alone. His analysis is excellent. He did not do any original investigative work, which is what I did a lot of. But for those who want to understand some of the basic questions around 9/11, his books are excellent reads. I am not a great advocate of Alex Jones. He and I have difficulties, primarily for two reasons, one of which is that I document every piece of my research. I've caught him fabricating stuff before. He tends to be a bit hyperbolic for me, and he doesn't filter. Anything that has to do with anything, he'll put it out as if it's a 3-alarm fire emergency, and he's done that with several issues around 9/11, especially that have proven to be absolutely unreliable, like the lawsuits filed by Stanley Hilton, which I said was a joke from the beginning, that was going to be a red herring that would suck energy out of the movement, which it proved to be. Alex's heart may be in the right place, but I cannot endorse his research style or his presentation. David Ray Griffin, on the other hand, has done some brilliant analysis.
First of all, thank you.
Thank you.
Two very quick questions. The first is, as you're pioneering what it is that you're presenting to us and the world, it seems as though you must also be pioneering how to handle all of this personally. In other words, how do you sleep? And do you have anything to say about that?
How do I sleep? Or
yeah, other than good, bad. I mean,
yeah.
In other words, you're having to put this through your system, and it's a big deal. And as we get more exposed, and we're looking at the kind of things that you're exposing, it's a challenge.
I would not be able to function if I did not have a very deep spiritual life. And let me draw my distinction here. Religion is for people who are afraid of going to hell, and spirituality is for people who have already been there. I have... I was talking outside to someone, and somebody, one of the questions I'm asked most often is, are you afraid of being killed? No, I'm not. First of all, there's nothing they can do to me that's worse than what they've already done to me. And you can read about that some of that on my website. Secondly is, I will not die a minute before God says so. But to quote Einstein, Albert Einstein, once you know there's a God, it makes no difference whether you believe in one or not. And it is that firm spiritual conviction that I have that there is a purpose, that there is a mission, even though I cannot see where it's going, that in the blackness, faith is always defined as the belief in things unseen. That there is something that is redeeming for the human race, because we have, as a species, we have not done a very good job, I don't think. But this might be a chance to redeem ourselves, to find in our own spirits that seed of something which may evolve in us beyond to produce something better. I don't know how the movie's going to come out. I only know what my job is. And as long as I'm comfortable on a daily basis and doing the best that I can, I know that I'm okay. Death will come to us all in one way or another. That's unavoidable. So the right code, the code of the warrior, so to speak, Bushido, would be the code of honor, to be true to what you are and to what your job is. And thank God it took me a long time, but I know what my job is. So now we all can find solace and comfort in knowing that I've autographed maybe 5,000, 10,000 books. And every time I autograph, almost every time I autograph for someone who's in their 20s, I say, look, I'm so, on behalf of my generation and the generations before, I am so very sorry for what we have left you. This book is my amend to you and your generation. And so those of us who are doing this now and who want to make this world a better place to live, or save as many lives as we can around peak oil, can make amends and so progress spiritually and personally along that path, no matter where it ends. Beyond that, I don't ask any more questions. I just keep it simple.
Thank you. Thank you. Last quick question is, any input on chemtrails, since we're one of the poster
I've seen a lot of stuff on chemtrails and nothing conclusive one way or another. And those of you who know my work, I don't speculate. Or if I do, I clearly say this is speculation. I don't know what chemtrails are. They could be any number of things. I've never seen any clear-cut, hard chemical analysis of what's in them. So I cannot draw any conclusions. Part of me suspects they may have something to do with HAARP, the high-frequency active oral research project up in Alaska, which might have to do with weather control. But beyond that, I don't know. It's just a guess. Yes, sir.
You mentioned gold and obviously owning your own home near a stream with lumber and a garden plot.
Right.
What other financial strategies in a more general sense, do you have any suggestions?
My first advice to anybody and everybody is get out of debt as quickly and as quickly as you can. Now, along those lines, people have been amazingly conditioned not to see many options that are truly available to them to do that. And along those lines, I recommend two groups. One is Pinnacle Quest International, which does an incredible amount of education. Both Catherine Austin Fitz and I lecture for them twice a year, offshore. Pinnacle Quest International, if you go to my links page on my website, it's down at the very bottom of the links page. And the second, right here in Eugene, you have a wonderful resource center with a semi-wonderful guy, Gino over there, who educates people. And bear in mind, these are business people. We all have to eat and all that too. But there is a tremendous amount of knowledge about things that you can do to protect what wealth you have or to get out of debt. Not everybody is able. Students are in a particularly hard spot. You have lots of student loans, and those are hard to get out from under. But there are ways to protect what assets you have and to get out from debt, because clearly, as complex societies collapse, and civilizations have collapsed, the Romans, the Hittites, the Mayans, the Incas, and all that, it's impossible to predict because it's not a linear progression of events. I mean, you have chaos theory. You literally have, so the thing which guarantees or doesn't guarantee, which promotes survival, increases your odds, is flexibility. And flexibility is, in my opinion, financial flexibility is one of those things. And having access to your money, being able to use it in foreign countries, keeping it out of the hands of the corporations and the governments, and making that wealth work to enrich your friends and the people in your tribe, so to speak. But getting out of debt is extremely important. Other than that, education of yourself, what peak oil means and what skills you have that you may bring to a post-petroleum environment. That's why in a community like this, there are many different skills. There might be a guy who's a welder. There might be a guy who's an organic farmer. There might be somebody who knows how to drill a well. And all of these skills together can ensure the survival of the tribe. So there, what you got to do is you really got to get out and meet people. You got to meet neighbors like you've never met them before, because they really may save your life. Thanks.
What was that resource in Eugene?
Ashland. Did I say Eugene? I'm sorry, it's Ashland. Southern Oregon Resource Center. They're right here in town. Yes, sir.
I've done research with Richard Duncan. I'm in touch with Walt Youngquist, Buzz Ivanhoe, and I was in touch with M. King Hubbard when he was still alive.
Oh my God.
I've got 3 papers that I'd like to send you. Do you have a mailing address?
Yeah, but I'm not going to go, yes. Let me give you a card. Yes, I'll be more than happy to after I'm done. I'd love to see that, because these guys are the real pioneers on peak oil. Yeah, they were the geniuses.
Do you have a card?
Yes, I do. And you need to put on there that right inside the package, I met Mike in Ashland. He asked for this. That way, I get a lot of unsolicited material. Yes, sir.
Hi. I do want to correct one statement you made. You were
Sure.
running around with big numbers. The Fannie Mae, it's $9 billion, not $900 billion.
I apologize. Okay, you're right.
Okay.
9 billion.
I was doing some research and came across a tidbit that doesn't fit into my picture, and with you may be able to understand this and offer some insight. It was talking about the infrastructure in China, building the infrastructure and all this kind of, and mainly about the in Taipei. And it said 9 out of 10 tankers leaving Taipei are completely empty. Not tankers, ships. 9 out of 10 container ships leaving Taipei are completely empty. And for my way of thinking, it's like, okay, they're importing everything. They're exporting everything. That's their primary economy. So that didn't fit. And I'm just wondering if you have any insight to how that would make sense to you.
No, that's very interesting, and I don't. That is a lead that I would like to follow up on, though. That is a very interesting bit of information.
Okay.
Whatever explains that is going to be very interesting.
Also, along this, in April, the regulatory agency that governs the government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, everybody should realize that the housing sector rode us through the last recession and pretty much prevented a depression in this country. That's how important the housing sector
Mm-hmm.
is. So anyway, along the lines of this examination of Fannie Mae, somebody recently gave me some information about what he said. He's an investment banker, and he's written some software that helps people interpret where they might have been overcharged in interest and things like that. But what he said was, as it relates to software programming in the banking industry and Wall Street and all that, he said everything is written on a program, COBOL, which is an ancient program.
Yes.
And it's kind of like that's the foundation, and they come and rework these programs, but the programmers don't understand the original programming. And this is along with when you spoke here right after 9/11, you mentioned Catherine Austin Fitts, and I started reading her research, and
Right.
I've been kind of focused on,
She's an amazing
HUD
woman.
and all that kind of stuff. And so now this kind of Fannie Mae stuff coming out, it's like, oh yeah, it's the kind of stuff she was saying back then.
Right.
Anyway, what this testimony he gave before Congress was, the examination of these things are expanding and all this, but what we found was this. We found that, and this is specifically talking about hedging and derivatives and how they cook the books. He said when they do their internal accounting on the software program, he said what we found is that since 1983, the entire infrastructure of the accounting, the software programming they use, it's not able to do what they really think it's doing, or what they want you to think it's doing. And so, in essence, what he's saying as he's departing from this office, is he's saying, for the last at least 2 decades, or more than 2 decades, and this is just one example of the whole what's going on in the corporate world. It's more of Enron, but for the last 2 decades, the entire infrastructure for accounting, for being transparent to investors and things of that nature is basically a sham.
Yes, it is. Absolutely a sham.
Yeah.
And there's companies like DynCorp, which is, we could do hours on DynCorp, AME or AMS, Lockheed Martin, that control this software, and that's how we find that the Pentagon in 2000, fiscal year 2000, had to announce that they had lost $2.1 trillion of your money and didn't know where it was. Trillion with a T.
They admitted that on September 10th.
That's right, September 10th. Well, no, that was HUD. HUD lost $59 billion, and in congressional testimony, Susan Gaffney, the Inspector General for HUD, testified. Basically, she said, a member of Congress said, well, what did you do when you found out that this $59 billion was missing? She basically said, we made an adjustment to our checkbook. That's it. Yes, ma'am.
I want to
Thank you,
ask
sir.
2 questions, one about vesting locally, but first on 911, just the little questions I have from people. As far as the Twin Towers going down, do you believe they used explosives, and how did they hide that?
Okay.
And also, the Pentagon getting hit on the hardest side and all that David Griffin talks about, was that a missile? Because there was no plane other than one
No.
piece of scrap.
Okay, let me respond to that. First of all, I have taken the position, which has served me well, that I would not get into large debates about physical evidence. And the reason being is I've been in court many times as an expert witness. I was a narc. And anytime, if I'm in court and you're the jury, and the issue is whether Joe Blow said X, Y, Z or not, and there's a record that Joe Blow said X, Y, Z, you don't need a scientist to interpret that for you. You can read the record, and the person either said it or they didn't, they did it or they didn't. When you get into physical evidence, however, you get into scientific evidence. So the prosecution has to call experts, the defense calls experts, and basically it's a big prostitution game for money, which confuses, befuddles, and confounds the jury, and really opens up areas of no solutions. And I said from the start on 9/11 that I wouldn't go near physical evidence for the simple reason that I have proved a case of premeditated mass murder without going near physical evidence enough to put Dick Cheney to death, were he convicted in a court of law in a capital case, right here. I did it without physical evidence. So what you're asking me to do is speculate. So all I'm going to do is tell you what I believe. Number one, let me go answer your second question first. There are 75, Mark, eyewitnesses? Hundreds of eyewitnesses around the Pentagon who saw a jetliner hit the Pentagon. Hundreds. How are you going to overcome that in a jury trial, even if it's not true? Now, I was born in D.C. I've driven around the Pentagon many, many, many times on I-95 and on the offshoots of I-95 that connect through Alexandria, Falls Church, and elsewhere up there, Crystal City. And believe me, you can see the approach for that airplane. It's a wide open, low grassy field, and there's, you know, right over Arlington Memorial Cemetery. I do believe that a jetliner now hit the Pentagon. Unfortunately, in Thierry Meyssan's book, and I didn't find this out until after Rubicon was out, there are actually photographs of a 757 engine in some of Meyssan's early photographs. So, but you know, so now, you know, I say, but that's all irrelevant anyway. What's more important, and I totally agree with Mark on this, and Mark has done the best dissection of this on his website, oilempire.us, where he dissects the disinformation around 9/11. What's more important is why that plane made a 270-degree turn, a loop-de-loop, as Kristen Breitweiser called it, to strike the unoccupied wing of the Pentagon. That's much more important, in my view. As far as the collapse of the buildings go, I absolutely do not believe that the Twin Towers fell on their own. I am not going to guess at how. Because you run into, as a detective or an investigator, I can't prove the answer. How would the charges have gotten in there? I mean, how would you rig them, et cetera? I chose not to debate that. It was irrelevant to me. But I think probably the most telling question that I have out of all the collapses is WTC-7, which is just amazing. That was a controlled demolition in my mind. There's no doubt about it. And there are quotes indicating that it was a controlled demolition. And in my book, I show clearly that the Emergency Operations Center for the City of New York was in WTC-7, and the Secret Service was in that office before the attack started in direct communication with Dick Cheney. I got that in here. And I believe that the remote control apparatus used to steer the airliners precisely into the World Trade Center was in that building, and the reason why they destroyed WTC-7 was to destroy the evidence. They couldn't unload and take all that evidence and all that remote control equipment out of the operations center, so they just blew up the building. And I think that was planned. So that's my answer for that.
Okay, and then the second part, if you want to invest locally, I've been giving money to the Democratic Party, hoping we just get out these better.
Hillary Clinton is not the answer.
But as far as then investing locally, I mean, even environmentally, I've been trying to give money, but as far as otherwise, if it just looks like everything's going down, I don't know about doing that. How do we start getting something together to start investing in infrastructure here?
Okay, well, you don't necessarily want to start investing in infrastructure here on a personal basis. What you want to do is to go to the actual, what do you have, a city council? What kind of a system do you have here? Is it a city manager council? Is it a mayor, strong mayor? What do you got?
Mayor system with 6 city council members and a mayor.
Okay, you want to start working on the city council and the mayor to start investing in infrastructure and to start looking at how they spend their money, both inside and outside the county. You don't want to start working. But infrastructure you would work on yourselves would be solar panels on your own homes, biomass. Rob in the back's already making biodiesel. There are a lot of people around here making biodiesel, which is not sustainable, by the way. In other words, it won't keep 6 billion people consuming the way we consume. Consumption's a major problem, but boy, it's going to save a lot of lives down the road to have the capacity to make biodiesel locally. It's not sustainable even by growing crops. You want to work on your local government, like Willits, California has got a good model. You might want to start a little shuttle service here between here and Willits and some of the other cities that are doing this kind of thing to learn from their experience. Also work on your county government as well. Why are you laughing about that? What don't I know? Okay, well, you know, these elections you might be able to influence as long as they're not controlled by electronic software that you don't get to inspect. You know, yes.
My name is Pam Vavra, and I want to thank you for being here. And I have a question about the World Trade Center. and the Twin Towers. Is it true that most of the CEOs of the companies in the Twin Towers were at a meeting called by Buffett that day?
No. I checked this rumor very thoroughly, and I don't print anything that I don't check. There was supposed to have been at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska a meeting called by Warren Buffett. And Offutt is where President Bush flew after leaving. I think he went first to Barksdale in Louisiana, then to Offutt. And I did find a couple of CEOs there. And I found that Warren Buffett was doing an event, but never have I found a list of World Trade Center CEOs that were at Offutt. You can't prove that. And I don't pass rumors on. That has not been proven. Certainly it is known that most of the CEOs, almost all of them, were not in the World Trade Center that morning. But it has not been proven that they were at a meeting at one place called by George Bush. No.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to apologize if I started your coughing fit by inviting you to stay at my house. But,
I have 6 employees. It's going to be a little crowded. And, you know,
well,
I have to find office space for them and a place for them to live, too.
We do have a 27-acre farm where we grow food to help build and sustain a local economy. And we do have other people staying there. And there are many people in Ashland who are working very hard to build and maintain a strong local economy. And we do have a very progressive city council, by the way. And while my husband's growing the food, I help organize the Green Party so we can continue to build and maintain a progressive city council here. And we are looking at the county too, but right now it's a pretty sad case.
Keep your noses to the grindstone. Don't let those bastards get away with nothing. Are we out of questions? You have to come up, please, and take the microphone, because otherwise they won't be recorded and the audience can't hear. Please come on up and ask them. You haven't worn me out yet.
I have a question about the title of your book. Historically, crossing the Rubicon was a reference to Julius Caesar taking an armed force across the Rubicon to overtake the Roman government and so forth. And once you crossed the Rubicon, there was no going back.
That's exactly right.
So are you saying there is no going back?
Absolutely. That's why, look, I spent 25 years of my life beating my head against the wall trying to change the government. And I have made every mistake and learned every lesson it's possible to learn. I've met more members of Congress who said they were going to do something about the CIA and drugs. And I've been to 60 Minutes has interviewed me a number of times. And I've done everything you can think of. And after 9/11, I'm absolutely convinced that trying to get the American people to change the American government is absolutely futile. We are living in an empire. That we have no more access to government. Lose any illusion that somehow we're going to elect somebody somewhere who's going to do something. It's too late.
I'm curious, is that, forgive me for saying that, is that a pessimistic or an optimistic point of view?
It's a realistic point of view. I've been there. I've done that. I got the T-shirt. I got the bullet holes. I got the scars. I got almost 30 years of experience at this. And, you know, I have members of Congress who subscribe to my newsletter, and I'm not going to tell you who says to me what, but they're all of the same opinion. They're just there collecting a paycheck, trying to do what little they can. They don't have any belief in the American system of government anymore. They don't.
Is that why they let 9/11 happen? Because, I mean, it's obvious. They can't be that dumb.
Well, Congress didn't let 9/11 happen.
But they haven't, like, started talking up about it.
They were all too scared, way too scared. They're either corrupt, crooked, or stupid in Congress right now. Absolutely. Look, two things I would like for you to do. Please subscribe to my newsletter. It's only $50. If this is Ashland, you know, it's the best investment you can possibly make with $50 of your money, because I'm going to give you breaking news as far ahead of time as you saw all the other stories I did. But if you want to see something else, get this DVD and see the way I started it. For 42 years, we've had a videotape, we've had a film of John F. Kennedy's head going front to back, front to back, front to back, from a frontal headshot. Can somebody please tell me what we've changed in government to deal with that crime? There's no hope that way.
I actually have
like 3 questions. Speaking of Congress,
It'll cost you. I'm kidding.
I already bought the book.
Okay.
So I get 3 questions. The first one, you mentioned Congress and they were too scared. Do you think there's any expressed or implied intimidation of members of Congress and, you know, progressive?
Yeah, they murdered Paul Wellstone, for Christ's sake. And I exposed that one. You know, there was a great congressman from Texas, Henry Gonzalez, who had big brass ones. And he was going after major corruption in the banking industry that was tied to Wall Street, and his car got machine gunned on a Washington street. Of course they killed members of Congress. They killed Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King. They killed, you know, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, the second question. I'm looking for a little more definitive answer this time.
Okay. I'll try not to be equivocal in the next answer.
What was the second question? Well, I'll go with the third question.
Okay.
Oh, put options. Have you heard anything inside? Like, did they ever get to the bottom of who bought all those put options?
No, and that's what the BBC wants to do a documentary about.
Yeah.
Okay, based upon my research.
Cool.
Okay, we have had no public disclosure of who placed the put, and those put options were placed on financial markets from Tokyo to San Francisco to Chicago to New York to London to Berlin. We're talking tens, maybe hundreds, you know, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars and maybe billions of dollars in put options. And I explain how that happened in the book, Crossing the Rubicon.
Yeah.
Can you explain to us what a put option is?
A put option, before 9/11, very short answer, a lot of put options were placed on stocks that were only affected by 9/11. 2 airlines in particular, United and American, no other airlines. That's a clue. A put option is basically a bet that a stock price is going to fall, as opposed to a call option. Generally, one put option covers 100 shares. A put option, if I buy one put option for 100 shares of United Airlines for, let's say, $1,000, it gives me the right to purchase United Airlines stock and sell it at a fixed price. Excuse me, not purchase, but to sell it at a fixed price. So, if I buy a put option on UAL stock, betting that the price will go down, it's usually a 90-day or 4-month window on a put option. Then 9/11 happens. Now I buy a put option to sell United Airlines stocks at $100 a share. 9/11 happens, UAL stock goes down to $20 a share. I go out and buy 10,000 shares of UAL at 20. I exercise the puts and sell them at 100. And that's the way a put option works.
And the last question. How easily they're announcing all these oil reserves now, you know, more and more it's coming out. Well, we say we have this, we have this. Is it probably the military has a huge stash other than the strategic to keep the war machine running?
No. Well, how can you have a huge stash? The military will always have first priority. They'll always get all the oil they want whenever they want it, as long as it's available, and you'll get it last. You can't have a huge staff. The SPR, Strategic Petroleum Reserve, in this country, I think is 70 or 700 million barrels. It's enough to keep the country running for about 7 or 8 weeks. But that's in huge vacant, abandoned salt mine caves in Louisiana, Texas, and so forth. But you can't hide that much oil. You can't build tanks for that, you know, and all that stuff. So, no, they'll just get first call. That's why they're occupying Iraq anyway. Yeah. Who's there? They're right next to the refineries. And Halliburton's pumping the oil. They'll just give it right to the military. Okay.
Thanks.
Hey, Mike.
Yes. Hi, Rob.
This question has come up a couple of times at the table, and I thought I'd ask you up front. What kind of facilities do you need here in Ashland to move yourself and your operation here?
Okay. Let me just digress for a minute as I answer that. There's a couple of reasons why we haven't been able to move. The FBI or the Homeland Security got moles into my staff. The latest attack on us was that, and I don't mean that they were FBI agents, that one member of my staff had big IRS problems, and I'm sure they twisted him with that. I don't know what the last one had. But the last guy was doing things like people were writing checks, mailing in checks with an order form. He'd deposit the check and tear up the order form. So I would have no idea who ordered what, but yet the money was in the bank. He was misshipping product. He was on overseas orders, he was shipping to the wrong country, charging me, hundreds and thousands of dollars of UPS overseas shipping fees. He wasn't mailing out hard copy subscriptions, wasn't mailing product, not picking up packages. I mean, everything to make it look like I was a crummy businessman. We caught him. I'm going to court with him on the 28th. We've been trying to recover from that. What we need is we have 4 full-time employees in the office right now, plus Ken Levine, my agent publicist, who we want to get up here. So what we need is office space up here. But there's an expansion that I'm trying to do, to put together right now. And I was trying to incorporate right before this last round hit us, which we've survived, but it damn near put us out of business. Then Dad died. Which is to set up KeyWire, which I think I mentioned earlier, which is to scan 450 news websites on a 24/7 basis, to pull out the stories like you see up here and have them ready for you every morning from all over the world, with my editors going through, so that we have literally a tsunami warning system for what peak oil is doing, whether it's military, biowarfare, economic, or whatever. It's an enormously valuable service, and I know how to do it. I do that kind of research, and I've got the researchers who do. I have a paid subscriber base. Although I have 22,000 subscribers, not all are paid. There's a free subscriber section. But easily charging $20 a month, if I can get 10,000 subscribers, you can see the cash flow and the industry and we could generate. But that takes a lot of infrastructure to set up. That's what I want to do. So what I want to do is we need to get up here. I need a place to live. We need the office space, but then I'd have to get living space for my other people up here so that we could do that and move our operations without interrupting the operations. That seems to be the big one right now, because we run the website and we have the databases and everything else. So I'd almost have to have a redundant system set up here with all of our databases before I shut down the one in Los Angeles, and that's the tough one. I almost bought, a couple of years ago, I was looking to lease a building down here on Benson. Benson? Yeah, that's it, right down there. Yeah, the building is still there. And, but I want to get up here. Now, I also have to settle my father's estate and trust, but if things fell into place, I could be up here this year. But basically what we need is cash, and we need places to go. And, I can't buy property up here yet. I am still living in a single apartment, even though I'm driving a 2003 Cadillac DeVille. We need places to live and to sustain ourselves so we can get it off the ground here. That's what we need.
Across from,
Thank you.
From Taco Bell, there's an empty pet food store. That would give you more space than you need, probably.
Okay, well, this is stuff we have to look into. I really don't need storefront space. I have really huge security issues too, though. With plate glass windows don't work, and we have to get hardwired because we've been burglarized before, and so it's getting the right building. Ultimately, I would like to, if we make it well, and I'd like to get 20, 30, 40 acres and start a foundation out there where I live, so that we can start researching post-petroleum living and construction, solar panels, and things like that, so that we can share that knowledge too. But something will fall into place. The storefront property though scares me for security reasons. But thank you, and I can, and I will take some time to look around as the opportunities present themselves. But thanks for the suggestion. I'm afraid I just don't have that loose in my pocket at the moment. We just barely escaped this last sabotage and kept our bank account intact, and we are not going out of business, but we're making the bills and we're trying to boost our cash flow. So that's. Well, I sure do, and when the time comes, I'll let people up here know. I just haven't seen. Spiritually, my experience is that if I try to make something happen over and over and over again and it's not working, I got to go away, because when it's time for something to happen spiritually, it usually just falls at my feet, and the door's open. Huh? Well, there's former spooks living everywhere, so. That's okay. I'll take my chances here rather than any place else. This is where I want to be. I'll get here. We will get here. From the wilderness, we'll get up here, and my people will get up here, and we're going to do a lot of good up here. Thank you for asking that. I really appreciate that.
when you came here shortly after 9/11, you gave that presentation. One of the boatload of facts that you were dishing out, one stood out and really just knocked me over. I called my son and told him, and boy, he called me back recently, you know, a couple of years later. He must have put his bong down long enough to hear me. But he said, Dad, remember that thing you told me that Ruppert said about that plane that picked up all the Arabs and flew out of the country on 9/11?
Yeah.
He said, I just read some story or something on the internet. The first time they've acknowledged that happening. So my question is this, would you, and he wasn't able to show me where it was or anything like that, but would you just, I mean, because that was such a powerful
That's been well
bit.
acknowledged, known for a long time. Even Michael Moore, who I'm not a great fan of, talked about that.
So what in fact happened? Was it one plane or?
No, there were several planes from all over the company that rounded up members of the bin Laden family and the Saudi royal family and other key VIPs and took them all collectively. One was Kentucky, one was from Florida, I think one was from New England somewhere. Then took them all to Dulles, and then a special flight left from Dulles and took them all back to Saudi Arabia.
And has the administration, to your knowledge, acknowledged that now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's in the 9/11 report, absolutely. That's one of the things that they did tell, although they didn't tell the full story about that, but they did acknowledge that those flights took place.
Other than basically our government wants 2/3 of the world's population to die off, why would they want our country to go down so fast? Why are they giving tax breaks to people to drive 6,000-pound vehicles rather than?
Well, that's because everybody's going in debt driving the 6,000-pound vehicles, and they're mortgaging up to the hilt. And
how does that benefit the government?
It doesn't benefit the government. The collapse benefits the government because all the money behind the government is already offshore. It's not going to be hurt by the collapse at all. This country cannot. This country is 5% of the world's population, consuming 27% of the world's energy. Okay, as you go over peak, you have to slow down consumption or the whole planet collapses. So that's where the term demand destruction comes from. You destroy the economy, you put everybody out of work, and the biggest consumer of energy consumes a lot less. That buys everybody else a lot of time. In the meantime, the big money's already offshore, or it's already well protected here, and it's not going to be hurt by that, and they can come back and pick the carcasses in foreclosure for anything they want to.
And so as far as also investing, you say just invest in gold.
Not just, no, I didn't say
just. What about
just.
investing in oil since it's supposed to go to $200 a barrel
Well,
rather than $50
here's the
right
problem
now?
with that.
You have to trust the stock prices, or?
No, here's the problem with investing in oil. It may cost, oil may go to $200 a barrel, but what happens when they're paying $180 a barrel to get it out of the ground?
Yeah.
As you go over peak, every barrel of oil becomes more expensive to get out of the ground. They drilled, out of the first 25 wells drilled in the Caspian Basin, 24 were dry holes. The first well drilled in the Caspian Basin, a dry hole, cost $250 million. It ain't all profit.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
I would not invest in oil.
Okay.
I mean, morally, I wouldn't invest in oil anyway, so.
So
you
what
know.
else besides gold?
Yeah, that's good. That I might be able to legally talk about that one day if I can ever finish the incorporation plan I was working on, but I can't legally discuss that now, or else the SEC will come and take my silly butt away. But nonetheless, there may be lots of good things to invest in, but I think we all have to ask ourselves moral and spiritual questions, not just gold. I'm a great fan. That's my only little investment. I own 15 ounces of gold. Right? But that gold has gone up something like 45% in the last 3 years. It's performed much better than the stock market has. Plus, I can take the gold with me if I leave the country. Here's a little secret about gold. How many people have ever traveled overseas? Ever fill out a customs form? What does it ask? Are you carrying more than $10,000 in U.S. currency? Yes? Gold is not currency. And if gold winds up trading at $600–700 an ounce, you can carry 20 pounds of gold out of the country and you don't have to declare it. And you can sell it in any country. Easy. There's 5 times more paper gold, by the way, than there is physical gold out of the ground. Do not invest in gold futures or gold hedge funds. There are some mining stocks, electronic gold. There's some e-gold trading that's pretty interesting. Mine sits in a safe at home, right next to a couple of my guns. Hi.
Hi. We hear a lot about the black government, black projects, and the money that's shunted into those. And do you have any facts on the UFO equation and the government's collusion with them? Do you get into any
On
of
the
that?
what?
The UFOs.
No, and no offense, I don't touch UFOs, and there's a very good reason, and it's purely tactical. The minute I open my mouth about UFOs, I will lose any credibility I have on 9/11. The people in Congress who listen to me, anybody, the access I have to news sources, the places, Al Jazeera, anybody else, the attacks will come out and they'll say, look at Ruppert, he's talking about UFOs too. I'm sorry, I can't even discuss it. No offense. I'm not going to say I don't believe nothing. I'm just saying I can't talk about it. And I don't talk about it. And I don't think it's particularly relevant. I will tell you this. To quote Don Henley, who I am seeing with the Eagles, and I love Don Henley. Music has saved my life over the years. They're not here, they're not coming, not in a million years, till we put away our hatred, till we dry up all our fears. You may hear the you may hear the engines running, you may hear the cosmos humming, but I promise you, my sister, they're not here, they're not coming. Don Henley. And they certainly aren't going to give us any energy at the last minute that's going to run our SUVs. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen either. Yeah.
Okay, back to gold.
Back to gold.
We're obviously being dispossessed of all of our liquid wealth.
Yes.
What do? Gold, silver?
Well, gold and silver are two really good investments. There are other investments that could be made. Silver actually has been performing exceptionally well. And I actually do have a little silver. Okay? It's all being manipulated, but it cannot be. Listen, it'll pop when they want it to pop, and it's inevitable that it will pop, especially as peak oil hits, because fiat currency and peak oil don't get along together. Okay? Gold has always been a recognized store of value because you can't. It doesn't react with anything. You can't. You know, it's something anybody can measure and test. Aside from that, though. You know, you have to be skilled. I mean, I wouldn't encourage someone to go out and play puts or shorts or longs or whatever on different stocks that may perform or may not. I'm not that kind of an investment counselor. It depends upon your personality, your temperament. Were it me, I would invest in land with the qualities that I talked about, but I wouldn't do it at the top of the housing bubble. That's the other problem.
Yeah, it's real inflated right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Diamonds are pretty hard to negotiate. That's a problem. Diamonds have always been hard to negotiate, and they're hard to evaluate. In other words, the skill level required to test whether gold is infinitely less than the skill level required to test whether you have a clear-cut blue, yellow, green diamond, or, you know, whatever you've got. Yeah, it is.
I guess I'm less concerned about what investments to make right now than I'm thinking of what Buckminster Fuller says, said that living with integrity is both necessary and sufficient.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I drove a car here, and I have investments, and I have trying to figure out how to put solar on buildings and things like that. I'm wondering right now what you might have to say in terms particularly of our community, of what we do to begin to create the systems that we are going to require. I've been reading Richard Heinberg.
I love Richard Heinberg.
I drove up to Salem a couple of
Fabulous.
years ago to lobby legislators on a different issue, funding. And I heard Richard Heinberg, and I recommend anybody. He's got 2 books, The Party's Over, and I'd say
Power Down.
Power Down, which I haven't read. And he has a newsletter as well on the web.
You can get them off my website.
And I'd never heard this before. My jaw dropped. I thought we can always move to hydrogen energy is the most abundant element, da-da-da-da-da-da. And Heinberg has some very good websites too, one on global media with
Julian Darley.
That you can listen to, but I'm curious about what actually, rather than, I mean, I don't think as individuals exactly that the survival is going to be.
No, this is a collective effort. I understand your question, but it's not for me to tell you what to do. You know your community much better than I do. There are a multitude of websites out there looking. Matt Savinar, which is Matt's oil, Matt's. Yeah, Matt Savinar. You can go type in peak oil, you go to my website, and you start looking around the websites. There are a multitude of websites out there that have been doing a lot more work than I have yet about post-petroleum living options. But again, one size does not fit all, okay? Ashland has specific requirements. You have a specific community, specific climate, specific. That's for you guys to work out. You have to go to the smorgasbord of stuff that's out there, factor that in, analyze your own community's energy usage, what you need for sustainable agriculture, et cetera, and start doing that on your own. That's not for me to tell you to do.
So you're talking about, for instance, lobbying the city council to start making...
Well, don't expect them to tell you. You got to start figuring it out for yourselves and telling them what you want them to do. That's the way democracy is supposed to work anyway. But I saw a great quote about a democracy today, which is, democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb
well,
deciding what's for lunch.
I've been sending the city council stuff on this issue.
Okay, but I mean, you have to go and tell them, we want this, we want this, we want this.
So I'd like to suggest to all of us that people go to the city council. I don't, for the life of me, I haven't understood why solar isn't ubiquitous in building codes here. In places where it's available. I mean, it's just, I mean, the city actually does a lot of things. They've got a lot of efforts.
Bear in mind that Willits is already doing that, and a number of other cities around the country are actually doing that. That they're already well ahead. And that solar, by the way, it's very energy intensive to make. Okay, so it's not going to be sustainable, and there's not enough solar energy to save the world as it is now. You would have to occupy most of the arable land available, which takes away from food. But for the best solar technology now, which is really good stuff, a lifetime of 20 years, 25 years if well maintained, can be replaced. You have 5 years before you get a payback on your energy. For the first 5 years, you're just recouping the energy it took to make the solar panels to begin with. Yeah, that's what you got to look at. Okay, yes, sir. Who's next?
This is a bit off topic, but the question about UFOs kind of opened it up. The Oklahoma City bombing has been one of those controversies that...
I can guarantee you that Oklahoma City was not blown up by a UFO, but that's okay. I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
Anyway, so I don't know if that's any kind of investigative stuff that you've looked at or not, but I've
sure.
sort of read so much about the implosion of it and et
Sure.
cetera.
I mean, right after Oklahoma City, I met with General Ben Parton, of retired U.S. Air Force. My dad was Air Force. I mean, that's why I know so much about the interceptor violations of protocol on 9/11. I was raised in an Air Force family. Dad, during the Korean War, when I was a little tiny baby, was flying F-89 Scorpions out of Presque Isle, Maine, and I still remember how cold it was up there. And I was raised on that. Parton was a retired Air Force general who spent his lifetime blowing things up, and he absolutely proved scientifically, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there were explosive charges placed inside the building. I have no doubt about that. I'm not going to speculate here or go into a long digressive discussion about what I think or why happened. I'm not sure that I have full conclusions on that. All I know is it wasn't the way you were told it went down. Yeah, that's nonsense.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for coming up here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. Three little things. One is, one's about gold. I wonder if they would ever try to make it illegal to take, X pounds in and out of the United States. The other thing is, if you saw that wonderful article in National Geographic about how close they are to making a totally undetectable as synthetic diamond, it will definitely give you pause about investing in diamonds.
Good.
And the third thing, which to announce this publicly, but I've always gotten flack from my friends, and I agree with you fully that locally is where it has to happen. But I saw some graffiti years ago, and it said, if voting ever really changed anything, it would be illegal.
Absolutely.
And I get endless flack from people I know when you don't vote? And I say, yeah, I'm a bad guy. I don't vote in local elections. So.
Yeah, well, local elections can be policed and monitored. I mean, you you can control, I think, you know, unless there's something written here that you have to use choice point software or any of the other software that's out there in a local election. Good. And then, you know, one of the things I love about France, in France, when they vote, the whole country counts their votes, paper votes, in public view overnight. In every precinct, they get a big room and everybody watches and they count by hand overnight. And yeah, so it can be done. We don't need the computers for that. But that's where it has to happen. I mean, Willits is leading the way. I wouldn't get defeatist about your local or county governments here. You can have a lot of influence here. It's at the state and because the big money is always at the state and the federal government. That's where the contracts are let. But you can start to pull the rug out from under those bad guys. I'm sorry? Bail-in ballots? All mailed-in ballots. Oh, okay. Well, who's present when they're counted? That's all you got to look at. You know, all you need is a check. Yes.
Okay. Last question.
Last question.
I just wanted to say that during the Y2K thing, you know, that happened, we had a lot of support here. We had all kinds of gardens planned. We had a big bicycle thing planned. And I remember distinctly they said, well, certain blocks would have a red ribbon at their door if they really needed help, or a blue ribbon if, you know, all the messages. We had all kinds of gardens and
it's a good drill.
Transportation, and some of us women, they were kind of disappointed that it never happened.
Well, that was a good drill, and I can guarantee you that peak oil is real. And here's another thing that you come back to. And anytime anybody runs up to you with one of these cockamamie stories about abiotic oil, or you know, there's infinite oil supplies, or they're hiding 20 billion barrels of oil in Alaska someplace, you know, under Jimmy Hoffa's body or whatever, then you just come back to them and ask and say, well, why is the world behaving as if peak oil were real? Because the world is absolutely behaving as if peak oil were real, deadly, and threatening. I guarantee you, it is the single most important event in human history. And we're right at the cusp of it right now. No more important event in human history than how we deal with this. Ashland, I love you to pieces. Thank you for having me up here.